Chapter 2103. After Gord Shangzhen took care of everything, he refused to let others follow him and went to where Qingqinzi and the others were. After a short while, he arrived outside the forbidden formation. However, when he saw the sword mark, his heart skipped a beat. This was the first time he saw such a killing power from a flying sword since the sword immortals left thousands of years ago. After a while, he felt 3 piercingly cold chi dynamics coming out from the Forbidden Palace. As he was afraid that the other party would attack him directly, he did not see the figures and just bowed to the inner room. Greetings, fellow Taoists. Qingqinzi saw that his chi dynamics were particularly vigorous, so he solemnly returned the greeting and said, "Are you the owner of this place?" Gord Shangzhen said, "I'm Gord, the mountain master of Mount Rhinoceros Moon. May I know why the 3 of you entered my forbidden land for no reason?" Ran Xiushu laughed and said, "I'm afraid you're wrong. This place is Shaoqing's territory. I'm free to come and go as I please. What does it have to do with you?" Gord Shangzhen frowned and said, "Perhaps you have some relationship with the previous owner of this place, but before the sword immortals left, they had already handed this place to us to manage. This place is already our territory." Qingqinzi said in a deep voice, "There's no need to say more about this. You and I both know what's going on." Ran Xiushu said, "If you think it's inappropriate, why don't you call your fellow Taoists and fight with us under the sword?" Gord Shangzhen could not help but be stunned. It seemed that the other party was not going to reason with them, so it was a little difficult. However, he really did not want to have a conflict with them now. Fortunately, he did not choose his opponent directly, so there seemed to be room for negotiation. His expression also became solemn. He said, "Let's not talk about the past for now. Then I'll be frank. What's the purpose of you coming back?" Qingqinzi said, "Just now I read the records of the predecessors in the cave abode. I know that the seniors who left many disciples in this world. May I know where they are now?" Gord Shangzhen was silent for a while before he said, "Those disciples that you mentioned are no longer here." When Qingqinzi heard this, there was no expression on his face, but there was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Calabash-Shin hurriedly said, "Please don't misunderstand. Your sect's disciples have only gone somewhere else to cultivate. If the 3 of you go look for them, you will be able to find them again." As he spoke, he added, "This was definitely not done by us. It was your sect's disciple who chose to leave. Back then, after the Rhinoceros Mountain took over this world, they did not know when these sword immortals would return. Furthermore, the entire land was not controlled by them alone. In reality, they looked after it together with a few other factions. Thus, in the beginning, the Rhinoceros Mountain did their duty and worked hard to provide the remaining disciples with cultivation materials. However, as there was no news of these sword immortals for a long time, they began to have strange thoughts. At such a time, the Sharp Moon Mountain's strength gradually rose. They either devoured the other sects or chased them away. In the end, they started to target the Shaoqing disciples openly and secretly. As all the sword immortals who had achieved mortal metamorphosis had left back then, the remaining Shaoqing disciples' cultivation was considered weak. Furthermore, there were not many of them. After seeing that these people had strange thoughts, they followed the sect's arrangements and went to another world through the realm gate. Over the past few thousand years, there were Shaoqing disciples who attempted to return to investigate the situation in the land alone. However, the Sharp Moon Mountain kept trying to stop them, preventing them from returning. However, they opened the realm gate to the cultivators of other worlds. This was actually to wash away the traces of the previous owner of this land from inside out. Then, this land would truly become the Sharp Moon Mountain's territory. Ran Xiushu asked, "Where did those fellow disciples go?" Calabash-Shin said, "I still remember that. If you want to visit them, I can send disciples to lead the way for you." He hoped that Qingqinzi and the rest would directly go to those lands to search. They were currently controlling the realm gate. It was not difficult for them to leave, but it would not be so easy for them to return. Qingqinzi said in a deep voice, "We will naturally search for those fellow disciples. However, your Sharp Moon Mountain lineage was originally ordered by our seniors to look after the realm gate. However, your actions have already gone against the seniors' instructions, so you should be punished severely. However, since you've been guarding it for so many years and have worked hard, we will not pursue the matters of the past. This time, we, the Shaoqing sect, have decided to take back this land. You are not allowed to stay here any longer. Within 3 days, you must move away from this world. Calabash Shin was stunned at first, as if he did not dare to believe it. Then, his expression slowly turned cold. He said, "So you've returned to snatch our land." Qing Qinzi said expressionlessly, "What snatch? This is the Shaoqing sect's land in the first place." Calabash Shin's expression changed slightly. He wanted to argue, but he was the only one here now. Even if they fell out, he would be the one at a disadvantage. So, he tried his best to suppress his emotions and said in a deep voice, "May I know where you want us to go?" Qing Qinzi said, "There are many realm gates between the two worlds. There are also countless outer realms. Where can't we go?" Calabash Shin was silent for a while and said, "I can't make the decision for this matter. I need to bring this news back and discuss it with my fellow Taoists." Qing Qinzi said, "I'll give you half a day. If there's no reply by then, we will come to take it with our swords." Calabash Shin did not say anything else. He bowed and hurried back. When he returned to the mountain where he was stationed, he gathered all his peers and repeated the conversation he had with Qing Qinzi and the rest just now. He said, "Fellow Taoists, our foundation is this realm gate. This is also something that we obtained with great difficulty. If we hand it over, we won't have a place to live anymore." He originally thought that there would be people who would support him. However, the person who wanted to go against the Shaoqing cultivators kept his mouth shut, while the rest clearly expressed their opposition. The reason was actually very simple. Even though thousands of years had passed, they were still very fearful of the sword techniques of the few sword immortals. Moreover, it was not that they really had no way out, so they were unwilling to have a direct conflict with them. Calabash Shin was deeply disappointed when he saw that, but he could not do anything alone. He could only listen to everyone's wishes and negotiate with the three of them again. So, on the second day, he went to the three of them again and said, "Fellow Taoists, we don't expect to occupy this place. We just want to have a place to stay. Consider it as borrowing your land. When we find a suitable place, we will leave this place." Ran Shoshu said, "Why do you have to go through so much trouble? There are many suitable places outside. Now that spiritual vigor is flourishing, you can go and find a place that won't be much worse than this place." Calabash Shin did not believe that at all. They had experienced the weakening of spiritual vigor, so they had a deep impression of it. Spiritual vigor had always been limited. How could there be more of it for no reason? And many realms at the same time. Moreover, those junior disciples might only need a little spiritual vigor to cultivate, but they needed purple pure spiritual vigor. Ordinary realms did not have enough spiritual vigor, so they could not condense this item at all. Calabash Shin said, "Why do you need to use such an excuse to deceive us? If this condition is not agreeable, then we will take a step back. Can you allow me to stay here for 100 years? When the time is right, I will leave." As long as he had this period of time as a buffer, he could collect enough purple pure spiritual vigor and find a way to refine it into a great medicine. Then, he could go to other places and barely survive. Qing Qinzi thought about it and said, 100 years is too long. Let's limit it to 3 years. Calabash Shin's expression changed. He said, 3 years is really too short. Can you give me a few more days? Qing Qinzi looked at him and said, "You can go back now. You still have 2 days to make a decision." It could be seen from the gourd that the other party was definitely not going to make any concessions. Feeling helpless, he cupped his hands and bowed, then left again. Ran Shoshu laughed and said, "It seems like this junior is not very willing." Qing Qinzi said in a deep voice, "If there is no reply the day after tomorrow, we will clean up this realm heaven on behalf of the sect." The three of them returned to the cave abode of the seniors to observe their swordplay. As for whether Calabash Shen and his fellow Taoists would agree to leave, they did not really care. If they did not, they could use this junior to sharpen their swordplay. Another day later, the three of them suddenly felt another aura approaching them. Qing Qinzi said, "Who is outside?" A voice came from outside, "My surname is Gu. I have sent a message to your sect. I wonder if the fellow Taoist from the last time still remembers me." Ran Xiushu heard the voice and said, "Senior Martial Brother, this should be the person who told me about the situation here through the divine will." Qing Qinzi said, "Fellow Taoist Gu, come in and talk." Not long after, a cultivator came in. He looked no different from the one Ran Xiushu saw through the divine will. After he came in, he bowed to the three of them and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." Qing Qinzi said, "What brings fellow Taoist Gu here?" The cultivator surnamed Gu sighed and said, "Yesterday's conditions were truly too harsh. A fellow Taoist entrusted me with a question. If they are willing to listen to your orders and serve you, will they be allowed to stay in this realm?" Qing Qinzi looked at him and said, "What you told Junior Martial Brother Ran back then was not the whole truth. The reason why you did this was partly to let Junior Martial Brother Ran and fellow Taoist Tian back off and leave this place earlier. The other reason was that you were afraid that the fellow Taoists here would not be able to compete with me, so you wanted to do them a favor." Cultivator Gu did not expect his thoughts to be seen through by the other party. He did not deny it and said with a bitter smile, "Exactly." Qing Qinzi said, "We don't need you to serve us, but no matter what you did just now still reminded Junior Brother Ran, so it can be considered a merit. Therefore, you and your disciples can stay here, and there's no need to mention the others." Cultivator Gu thought for a long time and bowed. He said, "Then I thank the three of you for your sincerity. I don't dare to disturb your cultivation, so I will take my leave now." With that, he left. Sun Huaying looked in the direction of his departure and said, "Looks like this junior is ready to fight with me." Ran Xiushu nodded. If these people agreed to stay for 3 years and then move away, there would be no need for such an unnecessary move. This cultivator Gu was undoubtedly looking for a way out. With their promise, no matter which side won, he would be able to guarantee that he would not lose himself. The three of them did not say anything else. They summoned their sword pellets and placed them beside them to protect them. Then, they went into meditation. Soon, the night passed. Qing Qinzi came out of meditation and looked at the sky. He said, "The time has come. Junior Martial Brothers, follow me to sweep this realm." Chapter 2104. On the Rhinoceros Mountain side, after a few days of argument and discussion, they finally could not accept the condition of only allowing them to stay for 3 years. Hence, they decided to fight with Qing Qinzi and the other two. Truth Gourd and the others knew that sneak attacks were useless against the sword cultivators. They could not even stop them if they wanted to leave. Hence, they could only defend in their own territory. Hence, they ordered people to activate all the restrictive formations in their territory and waited for Qing Qinzi and the other two to attack. On the altar, Truth Gourd sat in the main seat. Below him were his fellow disciples. Not far away from him sat a Taoist in embroidered robes with a smile on his face. At this moment, he turned slightly to the side and bowed to the Taoist, saying, "Thank you for your help this time, Taoist Lu." The Taoist in embroidered robes waved his horsetail whisk and returned the bow. He laughed and said, "We are close neighbors. How can we not help when your side is in trouble?" This Taoist Lu was a Shangzhen who had drifted to this place more than 300 years ago. The cultivators of Rhinoceros Mountain had always wanted to drive him away, but he was quite capable. On several occasions, he had found an excuse to stay. This time, they allowed him to live here for a long time in exchange for his help. However, it was obvious that many people were not satisfied with this arrangement. Some even sent a message, "Truth Gourd, this person can't be trusted." Truth Gourd replied, "I don't expect much from him. Now that the 3 sword cultivators are so aggressive, I don't know if I can win. Even if this person is useless, it's good that he can make a name for himself here." Not long after comforting the people, he felt 3 sharp chi dynamics coming towards him. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He said, "They're coming." In a flash, 3 figures shrouded in sword light appeared in front of the formation. Truth Gord and the other Taoists all looked solemn. For thousands of years, they had been fighting against the sword immortals as imaginary enemies. They also tried to understand the sword cultivator's divine sense from the ancient books left by the sword immortals. The world chess that Ran Xiushu and Tian Kun saw was not used for fun, but to help calculate the evolution of swordplay. It could be said that everything in this world, from the restriction formations to the secret arts and divine abilities, were all used against sword cultivators. However, the cultivators of Mount Sharp Moon still couldn't feel at ease because they had never had a chance to verify these things before, so they didn't know how useful they would be. Qing Qinzi looked down and made up his mind, summoning out a sword light. With just a flash, he reflected all the movements of the formation into it. He made some calculations and said, "This formation has already merged with the roots of heaven and earth. If we attack it head-on, the day the formation is broken will be the day the entire land collapses." It was impossible for such a formation to be set up in just a few days. At the very least, it would take hundreds or thousands of years of operation to link all the earth chi and spirit chi together. Therefore, the target of this senior should not have been them, but the seniors who had ascended to this place. However, if they thought that they would be blocked so easily, they would be underestimating the Shaoqing sword technique. He looked at Sun Huaying and said, "Junior brother Sun, I will use my sword light to illuminate the veins of spiritual qi. You will be the one to break the formation." Sun Huaying nodded. After a while, he felt Qing Qinzi's will and accepted it. After a while, he took a step forward and slashed downwards with his fingers. Truth Gord and the others looked up, waiting to see what the 3 would choose. "Don't you want this land? Once the formation breaks, the damage would be borne by the land below. By then, no one would be able to get it." Right at this moment, he suddenly felt a ray of sword light slash down before him, and then he felt the entire grand formation shake before it showed signs of collapse. Everyone's expression changed. Could it be that these sword cultivators did not care about this land at all? The Gord sensed for a while and found that something was wrong. The formation was clearly connected to the aura of the land, but at this moment, it was only the formation itself that was damaged. If he hadn't confirmed that there was no problem with the formation, he would suspect that someone had cut off the connection in advance. Sun Huaying looked down. It was true that the cultivators of Mount Rhinoceros had linked the spirituality of the earth with the Great Array, but that was only what they thought. With the information that Qing Qinzi had found out, in his eyes, the array was the array, the spirituality was the spirituality, and the heaven and the earth were the heaven and the earth. The 3 were never one. No matter how he slashed with his sword, it would only land on the Great Array, and it would not affect anything else. Under the slash of his sword, the whole formation began to collapse layer by layer. All the altars and mountains that were used to build the formation dimmed. In just a moment, the originally complete formation was riddled with holes. Seeing this, Taoist Lu suddenly stood up from his seat and apologized to Truth Gord. He said, "Taoist friend, I'm sorry that I can't help you against such an opponent. I have to leave first." Truth Gord looked at him coldly and said, "Taoist friend, do you think that those sword cultivators will let you go just because you're standing with me?" Taoist Lu smiled and said, "I will leave now, but I don't think that they will abandon you to chase after me." Truth Gord stared at him and said, "Aren't you afraid that we will make you stay?" Unexpectedly, Taoist Lu did not show the slightest bit of fear. He said confidently, "No, you all know your priorities. You won't abandon the enemy in front of you. Besides, I think you should be afraid that I will help those people and attack from both sides." Everyone's expression changed. Taoist Lu chuckled, waved his horsetail whisk, and swaggered out. Sure enough, no one went to stop him. They could only watch with gloomy faces as he escaped from the broken formation. Although he could leave, they had nowhere to go. But no one suggested to leave. Because they all knew that if they had agreed to help those sword cultivators, it would have been fine. But now that they had decided to form a formation to resist, the other party would never let them go. At this moment, the cultivators of Mount Rhinoceros felt a sudden tremor in their surroundings. Then, light shone in. When they looked up, they found that the huge formation had disappeared. No one dared to be careless. They hurriedly channeled their energy in an attempt to resist the attack that might come next. But in the next moment, everyone, including Truth Gourd, exploded in the air. At this moment, the formation that was set up in the innermost area as the last barrier suddenly rose up and wrapped everyone within it. Then, everyone's Dharmakaya reassembled. When they came back to their senses, they did not know what had happened just now. They turned to the divine will to observe and calculate. Only then did they see that a sword had slashed into this place. But what was shocking was that they did not know where the sword had come from. Gord Shangzhen could see Ran Xiushu's body through the aura. He was sure that Ran Xiushu was the one who had attacked with the sword just now. However, he could sense that Ran Xiushu was standing in the same place without moving. Combined with what he knew from before, he instantly understood that it was because this sword strike was too swift, and it exceeded their senses and even the circulation of the heavens and the earth. So, they were only able to confirm that it had occurred after this sword strike descended. He said in a low voice, "Everyone, there's no need to guess. This is an extreme sword technique. With my ability, I can't dodge it if I'm unprepared. But as long as everyone is constantly on guard against him, he won't be able to succeed so easily." This level of sword technique had long since surpassed the will. So, if a cultivator was slightly careless or stopped paying attention to the sword owner, they would be slashed again. When everyone heard this, their hearts trembled, and they hurriedly paid attention to Ran Xiushu to avoid repeating the same mistake. However, at this moment, a light flashed in front of them. Another sword ray flashed, and the protective formation around them was destroyed. After that, they looked up and saw 3 figures floating in the sky. One of the cultivators could not hold back any longer. He activated his divine ability and transformed it into a gray mist that enveloped Ran Xiushu. Because based on the situation just now, Ran Xiushu was undoubtedly the greatest threat and should be eliminated first. As soon as he attacked, everyone followed suit. More than half of the attacks were also aimed at Ran Xiushu. Ran Xiushu did not dodge or evade the attacks of the crowd. However, when all the Dharma treasures and dharmic powers reached her, they all disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had been teleported somewhere else. This was because although it looked like he was there, it was actually just a projection. The real Dharma body had been traveling with the flying sword and had never stopped. These attacks were actually following his chi activity. Because they were always on his path, they did not miss, and they would not appear in front of everyone again. It should be said that they had been led into another gap between the heavens and the earth by the sword chi. As long as he did not stop, he would continue to drift there. The gourd really knew that when the extreme sword technique was cultivated to a certain level, it could deter the enemy from afar and make them unable to relax for even a moment. Moreover, the person in front of them had almost no flaws. This was the most troublesome and headache-inducing opponent. The person in front of them was undoubtedly such a person. Thus, they used their divine will to transmit a message. "Everyone, there is no need to attack this person. Just be careful and eliminate the other 2 before coming back to deal with this person." However, before they could choose another opponent, they saw countless sword lights suddenly burst from where Qingqinzi was standing. For a moment, it was as if countless stars had fallen. Everyone's expressions changed greatly, and they hurriedly activated their dharmic treasures to block the sword light. But when their auras came into contact with the sword light, they noticed that something was wrong. In this world, only they stood there alone, and everyone else beside them had disappeared. At this moment, Qingqinzi was using the wonderful sword transformation technique. Everyone who came into contact with his sword light would be separated from the others. If they wanted to escape, they could only use their magic powers to break through, or they could simply see the various mysteries of the sword technique. Those who could do these 2 things did not need to worry about being separated from their peers. When the cultivators of Mount Rhinoceros saw this, they all unanimously adopted defensive measures. Not only because of the threat in front of them, but also because they did not forget that Ran Shushu was watching from the side. If they were the slightest bit careless, the other party might slash at them. Under such circumstances, no one dared to take the initiative to attack. They could only try their best to ensure that they were not injured. Chapter 2105. Just now, Sun Huaying hadn't made a move yet. When she saw that the Sharp Moon Mountain cultivators had been separated by Qing Qinzi's sword light, she looked down and found one of them. At the same time, she activated her will and the sword light slashed down. The cultivator's protective magic treasure didn't have much effect. The moment the sword light touched it, it let out a wail and was split open. Then, the sword light didn't stop and continued to slash at his avatar. He was terrified. He knew that such a flying sword was extremely fast. If his avatar was slashed open like before, he wouldn't have a chance to recover. He would only be continuously whittled away by the sword light until his essence chi and magic power were exhausted and he died. Thus, he hurriedly shifted his routes and dodged the attack. However, he soon realized that his magic power and chi activity had decreased by a lot for no reason. Feeling that something was wrong, he hurriedly used his divine will to deduce and quickly figured out the reason. It turned out that there was something special about this sword technique. When he sensed the sword, he was actually affected by it. Every time the sword appeared, a part of his vitality and essence chi would be shaved off. His expression instantly became very ugly. If his magic power and essence chi were completely destroyed, how could he even talk about shifting his roots? In reality, the Shaoqing killing sword lineage's cultivators could seize everything other than themselves. When facing enemies of the same generation, they didn't need to deliberately deduce their roots. They could just swing their swords. If the swordmaster's cultivation was high enough, a single sword would be enough to destroy the opponent's vitality. The cultivator understood that if he allowed Sun Huaying to do as she wished, he would definitely die. Thus, he repeatedly calculated in his divine will and tried to find a way to deal with it. However, after using up a lot of his divine will, he realized that he had no other choice but to choose to attack. Thus, he gritted his teeth and shot out all the magic treasures he had that were used to counter the flying swords. Then, he poured all his magic power into it. This was undoubtedly a desperate move, but he had no other choice, because he had no way of stopping his opponent's flying sword from killing him. Thus, rather than having his magic power slowly depleted during the battle, he might as well use it now, and he might even have a sliver of a chance to suppress his opponent. Sun Huaying activated the flying swords and instantly split them into hundreds of sword lights that poured towards the person. Along the way, the magic treasures and magic power that attacked him were all destroyed. Then, there was no more obstruction as the sword slashed past the person. In an instant, the cultivator's magic power and essence chi were all taken away. As his last trace of vitality disappeared, there was a rumble and a void whirlpool appeared out of nowhere, swallowing everything. Sun Huaying looked down. Under the deterrence of Qing Qinzi and Ran Shushu's cooperation, he didn't even need to use the divine ability in his sword. He only needed to use the most ordinary method to kill this person. Next, he just needed to repeat what he had done and eliminate these people one by one. He immediately used his magic power and searched for the next person. Because the cultivators of Mount Rhinoceros were illuminated by the sword light, they couldn't see anyone else. However, their divine wills couldn't be blocked, so it wasn't difficult for them to sense that they were missing one person. It had only been a short while since they were separated, but one person had already been defeated. Everyone couldn't help but feel a sense of panic in their hearts, worried that they would be the next target. In fact, just now, the formations that were set up against sword immortals didn't have any effect, which was enough to dampen their fighting spirit. At that moment, it wasn't that no one tried to escape, but every time they tried to move, they felt a sense of danger. There was no doubt that they were being watched by Ran Shushu, so they had no choice but to give up the idea. After Sun Huaying found the second person, it didn't take him long to finish him off. At that moment, his gaze shifted and paused on the cultivator surnamed Gu for a moment. Then, he went straight for the third person. When he found him and used his sword to cut him down, the result was as expected. When Zhenshang Gord noticed that the qi activity of his fellow sect members disappeared one by one, his heart sank. He originally thought that he could deal with these sword cultivators by relying on the formations and the divine powers and techniques that he had prepared for thousands of years. He didn't expect that these arrangements would be so weak. If he had known this would happen, he would have retreated. Perhaps he could have kept the resources that he had accumulated for thousands of years. He knew that he couldn't win this time. At that moment, he didn't want to win, he just wanted to escape. He thought to himself, looks like I can only rely on that thing. He raised it and shook his sleeve, but a cloud of gray mist scattered out. From time to time, tiny strands of colored light could be seen rolling in it. This thing actually had a long history. Back when the Sword Immortals were still in this world, there were often demons that invaded from outside the Heaven and Earth Gate. However, few of them were able to threaten the sword cultivators. There was only one time when a group of formless monsters crossed over to fight with them. Its body could release a strange mist that not only made people's minds sluggish, but it also had the ability to restrain flying swords. The Sword Immortals spent a lot of effort to kill the monster ancestor. He had a deep memory of this, so after he occupied this world, he ordered people to pass through the realm gate and tried to find such monsters. He succeeded in refining a similar mist from these monsters. However, these monsters were very rare, so it wasn't easy to collect them. He had a lot of them, but it was barely enough for him to use. Otherwise, he would have had everyone. Once this thing was taken out, it only took a moment for it to envelop his entire body. Qing Qinzi saw a cloud of gray mist spread out below him. He stood up and shone his sword light on it, but all he saw was darkness, as if something was blocking it. Ran Xiushu made a sound of surprise, and a hint of interest appeared on his face. He was originally staring at Genuine Gourd, but under the cover of the gray mist, his senses became blurry, and he even showed signs of breaking away from it. Sun Huaying didn't care about this. Even though the sword lights that slashed down earlier had all entered the mist and no longer received any response, in his eyes, there was nothing in the world that he couldn't slash apart. If one slash wasn't enough, he would use 2 slashes. If 2 slashes weren't enough, he would use 3 slashes, or even 1,000 or 10,000 slashes. With a thought, the sword pill instantly turned into countless sword lights that descended. Under the penetrating attacks that were like a tidal wave, the gray mist was clearly unable to resist, and it was slowly being whittled away. At that moment, Genuine Gourd was hiding in the mist and fleeing into the distance. He realized that this method had indeed caused his opponent some trouble, but that was all. It didn't have the effect of suppressing his opponent as he had hoped. If he couldn't escape in time, he might die here. Unfortunately, this kind of thing also affected him. When he was surrounded by it, he couldn't shift into the void. Otherwise, as long as he shook off the deterrence of Ran Xiushu's supreme sword, it wouldn't be difficult for him to escape. However, to his surprise, the mist faded faster than he imagined. In just a few breaths' time, it had become extremely thin from its original dense mass. When the last layer of mist was peeled away, countless sword lights pierced through his body. He couldn't help but be dazed as he stood there in a daze. At that moment, the sword qi that had separated him from his fellow Taoists seemed to have disappeared. He slowly shifted his gaze and saw that only he and the cultivator with the surname Gu were still standing there. When the latter saw him looking over, he cupped his hands and bowed, saying, "Genuine Gourd." Genuine Gourd stared at him for a long time. It wasn't difficult for him to guess why he was still standing there. He asked in a low voice, "Why is it like this?" The cultivator with the surname Gu looked up without a trace of shame. He said, "Has fellow Taoist Gourd forgotten? I was originally not a cultivator of Mount Rhinoceros. I was only forced by you to swallow up my sect. I haven't forgotten my origin." Genuine Gourd said, "But my Mount Rhinoceros has treated you well. The things you used to cultivate were all given to you by my Mount Rhinoceros." The cultivator with the surname Gu shook his head. "That's why I didn't add insult to injury. Genuine Gourd flicked his sleeve and turned his face to the side. He said, "Don't appear in front of me again. You're a fickle person." The cultivator with the surname Gu looked at him and nodded. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped and added, "There's no need to mention those things. This place originally belonged to those sword immortals. Fellow Taoist is just being generous. If I want to thank someone, it should be the owner of this place." After he finished speaking, he clasped his hands and left. Gourd Shangzhen sneered a few times, looked up at the sky for a moment, then closed his eyes. A moment later, with a rumbling sound, his entire body collapsed, and then a mysterious hole appeared in the sky, swallowing him. Seeing that all his enemies were dead, Qingqinzi changed his mind and put away the sword energy. At this moment, he felt a fluctuation of spiritual energy from the heaven and earth gate. He looked over and saw a cultivator in brocade clothes enter the inner realm. He arrived before the three of them and respectfully said, "I'm Winged Shangzonglu. Greetings, fellow cultivators." Ran Xiushu looked at him and asked curiously, "Just now Sir has left. Why did you come back?" Earlier, he'd clearly noticed that after the formation was broken, this person had already left the formation and fled. Moreover, he'd quickly passed through a door of the heavens and the earth and left this place. Because this person's aura was completely different from the cultivators of Lunar Rhino Mountain, he didn't stop him, yet he never expected that this person would return to his side. Taoist Lu said sincerely, "I'm not on the same side as those cultivators of Rhinoceros Moon Mountain. I came here just to ask for a place to stay. The reason why I'm back now is that I may have the information you need." Qingqinzi said, "What does Sir know?" Taoist Lu said, "I heard from Gourd that your sect is looking for those disciples who are stranded outside. In this regard, I might be able to help." Qingqinzi looked at him and said, "Sir knows the whereabouts of those disciples?" Taoist Lu smiled and said, "Yes, my disciples have traveled a lot and have some dealings with your sect's disciples, so I know their whereabouts." Qingqinzi said in a deep voice, "What does Taoist Lu want?" Taoist Lu bowed again and said, "My disciples and I have drifted here hundreds of years ago. This place is rich in spiritual vigor, a rare treasure land. Could you allow us to stay in your sect's territory for a few days?" Chapter 2106. Ran Xiushu looked at Taoist Lu and asked curiously, "Why do you insist on staying here? Now that the spiritual opportunity of all realms is flourishing and the desolation is gone, why can't you go?" Taoist Lu was slightly startled and said thoughtfully, "Is that true?" Previously, Ran Xiushu had said something similar to the gourd. At first, he thought that the gourd was being perfunctory. However, after arriving at the outer realm, he sensed the spiritual vigor in the surroundings and realized that the spiritual vigor in the outer realm seemed to be rising like this realm. It seemed that the gourd was telling the truth. However, he still insisted on his original intention. He bowed and said, "Although the spiritual opportunity of those realms is flourishing, it's still not as good as your land." Qingqinzi said, "I'll let you go for 100 years. Taoist Lu was very sensible and did not argue further. He said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Qingqinzi took out a jade talisman and sent it to him. He said, "This is a token of our sect. I'll leave the matter of contacting our fellow disciples to you." Taoist Lu quickly kept it and said, "I've already sent disciples to search for your people. It's just that the realm is rather far and will take some time. If everything goes well, there should be news in 2 or 3 months." He paused and said, "Do you want to know the whereabouts of the juniors of Rhinoceros Mountain?" Hu Chu and the others also thought that they might lose, so before the battle, they sent their disciples to the outer realm so that they would not be wiped out by the orthodoxy after their deaths. Qingqinzi said, "That's not important." He had no interest in the juniors of Rhinoceros Mountain. Others might worry about leaving behind a disaster, but the Shaoqing sect was not afraid at all. They even hoped that these juniors could recover their strength as soon as possible so that they would have another opponent. Taoist Lu saw that there was nothing more to say and left. Cultivator Gu, who had been watching from the side just now, walked up and said carefully, "Fellow Taoists." Qingqinzi looked at him and said, "What I've promised you before remains unchanged. Cultivator Gu heaved a sigh of relief. He dared not say anything more and bowed before leaving in the conveyance light. Ran Xiushu said, "Senior brother, we've swept this place clean. Should we return to the sect?" The spiritual energy in this realm wasn't bad, but it was about the same as in the mountain and sea realm. Now that all of his enemies had been wiped out, the place was empty, and there wasn't much to stay in. Presumably, he had left a clone behind to keep an eye on things. Qing Qinzi came up with an idea and calculated a little. He said in a low voice, "We can't leave yet. With the death of the people of Rhinoceros Moon Mountain, the qi dynamic of this realm has changed. Moreover, the Gate of Two Realms has always been connected to the outside world. I feel that there will be demons coming here in the next few days." Ran Xiushu pondered for a moment and said, "If that's the case, the Gate of Two Realms might have been purposely opened by the Patriarch to train the younger generation. The situation outside the realm is unclear. Why don't I go and investigate with Junior Brother Sun first? Senior Brother's identity is different, so there's no room for mistakes." Qing Qinzi nodded in agreement. Even though he was also interested in what was on the other side of the border pass, he would never place his personal wishes above the interests of the sect. Qing Qinzi nodded. Although he was interested in the other side of the realm pass, he would not put his personal interests above the interests of the sect. 2 months later, Daoist Lu came back and found Qing Qinzi. After greeting him, he said, "I've found the original camp of your sect, but when I got there, they had already left." He took out an item. "I only found this." Qing Qinzi took it. It was a sword sphere, but there was no spirituality on it, as if it had been refined just now. Usually, the sword spheres of Shaoqing disciples would contain some useful clues, but he did not see anything. He asked calmly, "What's the situation in the camp?" Qing Qinzi took it. It was a sword pellet, but there was no spirituality on it. It seemed like it had just been refined not long ago. Usually, the sword pellets of Shaoqing disciples would contain some useful clues, but he did not see anything inside. His expression did not change as he asked, "What's the situation inside the encampment?" Daoist Lu said, "That encampment doesn't seem to have been attacked. Fellow Daoists' fellow disciples didn't seem to be in a hurry to leave." Qing Qinzi pondered for a moment before asking, "Fellow Daoist, did you send a disciple to make contact with my fellow disciples?" Taoist Lu replied, "Yes." Qing Qinzi said, "I understand. Continue searching." Taoist Lu seemed to want to say something, but after a moment of hesitation, he didn't say anything. He cupped his hands and took his leave. Qing Qinzi looked at the sword pellet. He had a feeling that these fellow disciples didn't seem to want to see them, so they had taken everything else away except for this one. However, if he could strengthen the Shaoqing lineage by recruiting him, then what he thought was not important at all. If he wanted them back, they had to come back. In the silence, Towering Sky and Rendu roused their magic power in an attempt to find the source of the spiritual opportunity. After a long period of hard work, the two of them were gradually approaching the source. But at this point, they couldn't go any further no matter what. Because in their senses, the source was definitely in front of them, but the spiritual opportunity was everywhere at the same time. If they persisted in following it, they might accidentally go somewhere else. In this way, they would have to spend a lot of effort to squeeze in again from the outside, so they could only maintain a situation where they couldn't advance nor retreat. Daoist Rendu said, "Fellow Daoist, we can't go there. It seems that what fellow Daoist Ji Zhuang asked us to do can't be done." Daoist Towering Sky tried to explore the depths of the magic power, and he could vaguely feel someone standing there. The spiritual opportunity didn't feel like a cultivator of the same path, but more like a connate cardinal treasure, but it was also somewhat plausible. He pondered for a moment and said, "Since we can't go forward, let's do it here. Collect as much as we can. If fellow Daoist Ji Zhuang isn't satisfied, then we can ask him to send someone else here." Daoist Rendu nodded. With a thought, a green-skinned gourd appeared in his hand. He then threw it out and let it float in the air. The magic power that was fighting against them writhed for a while, and then a wisp of white gas was extracted from it and slowly absorbed into the gourd. Taoist Ji Zhuang did not ask them to come here just to stop this person. Instead, he had instructed them that if they could not get close to the person, then they should use this treasure to absorb his dharmic power and chi activity. When they brought it back, they could calculate it and see if they could find a way to break it. Taoist Rendu looked at the bottom of the gourd. After absorbing the white gas, the bottom of the gourd gradually turned from green to light gold. At the moment, it seemed to be a shallow layer, and it would obviously take a long time to fill it up. He thought for a moment and said, that Ji Zhuang wants us to lock up our spiritual opportunity. Are you really willing to do that? Taoist Towering Sky smiled indifferently and said, fellow Taoist, don't worry about it. As long as that Taoist Zhang didn't agree, then Ji Zhuang can't do it alone. Besides, how long can he hold the position of Mirror Master? It wasn't hard for Taoist Rendu to understand what he meant. Including them, all the spirit refinement cultivators in the Mirror Lake came from outside. Their goal was to find a place to hide. No one really believed in Ji Zhuang. They were only under his control because he was the master of the Mirror Lake. Yao Han ancestor, who invited them here, was a scheming person. Although he didn't make any clear moves, it was clear that Ji Zhuang was a bit afraid of him. Who knew when a conflict would break out between the two? After a long time, the gourd finally turned completely golden. Taoist Rendu thought for a moment and put it back into his divine will. He said, fellow Taoist, this matter is over. We can go back now. Taoist Towering Sky said, hold on. This is a rare opportunity. Why don't we search around and see if we can find a place of fortune? If we find it, then I will refine it and become the master of this place. Then I won't have to worry about Ji Zhuang anymore. Taoist Rendu sighed. Fellow Taoist's idea isn't bad, but this kind of place is really hard to find. It wasn't that they didn't try to find a place of fortune before, but they couldn't even find a fragment of fortune, let alone this kind of place. Taoist Towering Sky was about to persuade him again, but suddenly, his expression changed. He felt a boundless malice pressing down on him. How could he not know that he was targeted by that existence? Although he had already split his divine origin into 3 parts, it was still easy for him to deal with them. Luckily, when the 2 of them came out, they were already prepared for this. Right now, this body was only a clone, so there was no harm in giving it up. Taoist Skysoar sighed inwardly. Unfortunately, this person had come too quickly, and his original plan had failed. Fortunately, he would have another chance in the future. Since he knew that resisting this person would be useless, he didn't resist at all and allowed the pressure to pour down on him. In an instant, he fell into darkness. At the same time, within the Mirror Lake, Towering Sky and Taoist Rendu's bodies trembled slightly. Then, they opened their eyes and woke up from their meditation. With a thought, they appeared on a high platform. Jizhuang Daoren sat on the seat of honor. When he saw the 2 of them, he said in a friendly manner, "How did the 2 of you go on this trip?" Taoist Rendu stretched out his hand and took out the gourd from his divine will. Then, he sent it up and said, "The person who gave us the opportunity was very powerful. We only went with our clones, but it was difficult for us to get close. We even encountered that existence on the way, so we could only give up our lives and return. However, we managed to retrieve the opportunity, so we didn't fail our mission." Jizhuang Daoren glanced at the gourd floating in front of him and smiled amiably. "Thank you for your trouble." Taoist Rendu said, "If there's nothing else, we'll take our leave." Jizhuang Daoren nodded. Towering Sky and Taoist Rendu bowed, then their figures faded away. Jizhuang Daoren took the gourd and gently inhaled. Wisps of white gas flowed into his body. In the silence, an eye appeared on the smooth surface of the Mirror Lake. It turned for a moment, then quickly returned to its original appearance. Chapter 2107. Jizhuang Daoren stood up from his seat. He felt a bit different from before. His cultivation hadn't improved at all, but his aura had clearly increased by a level. He waved his sleeve and the restrictions in the inner realm surged, surrounding the platform so no one could see what was happening. Then he walked to the highest point, put his hands together, and bowed deeply. After a short while, the originally empty space shook, and a jade mirror appeared. Then, a human figure was reflected in the mirror, but it looked very faint. At this moment, he took a few steps forward. As his figure approached, the figure on the mirror gradually became clearer. Looking at the face, it was surprisingly him. However, the person in the mirror stood there without moving and looked at him expressionlessly. Ji Zhuang got closer and bowed again. Today, I have obtained a strand of essence energy as an offering, so there is hope for fellow to return. I will continue to search for that thing in order to finish this as soon as possible. When he spoke up to here, he stopped as if he was listening to something. After a while, he said, "Yes, it's extremely difficult to find that thing with my strength in the boundless void. However, I have a way. That existence should be able to sense that thing. Right now, his divine essence is split and can be said to be weak. If I'm able to find a clone and protect it from being devoured, I might be able to use it to find that thing. Earlier, I might have been afraid that it would cause trouble in the world after coming in and turn the tables on me, but now that fellow Taoist is here, I don't have to be afraid anymore." At this point, he paused again. After a while, his expression became solemn and he said, "Yes, I also know that I can't let my fellow cultivators in the world improve, and I can't let anyone reach spirit refinement. However, there are many obstacles here, and it will be difficult to complete in a short period of time. I can only do my best." The figure slowly faded away, and the jade mirror also dissipated like a puff of smoke. Jizhuang Daoren took a few steps back and thought, that Taoist Zhang's cultivation is very high, and he occupies a place like Bushutian. I don't have a way to stop him, so it's not a good time to have a conflict with him. However, I have to do this. He pondered for a long time before he finally seemed to have come to a decision, and he said, "Looks like we can only do that." With a wave of his sleeve, he removed the restrictions around him and immediately sent people to invite Ancestor Yao Han. When the latter arrived, he gave some instructions and bowed solemnly. "I'll leave this matter to you, Dao friend." Ancestor Yao Han returned the greeting, "This matter is urgent, I will go immediately." In Busu's clear Heaven Huan Palace, Zhang Yan was sitting in meditation. Just now, a cold light suddenly flashed in his eyes. Just now, in that instant, he sensed that the presence of that existence had appeared again. Ever since he and the sword-wielding Taoist split this existence's divine essence into three, this existence had vanished without a trace. He had thought that it would only appear after devouring the other two clones, but he had never expected it to appear again at this moment. He deduced for a moment and noticed that this existence had acted this time. On the surface, it seemed like it was because Soaring Sky and Rendu were wandering outside. However, he felt that there should be another reason for this. Because the two of them had clearly existed in the void for a long time before this. If that was the case, why didn't that existence act earlier? The two of them must have done something to cause this existence to appear. He pondered for a moment and felt that this most likely had something to do with the source of the inspiration. Thus, he summoned a clone and left the void in the blink of an eye, heading towards the location of the incident. Right now, he wasn't afraid of that existence. It was just that Busu couldn't leave him, so he could only send a clone out. However, unlike Soaring Sky and Rendu, his magic power was stronger, and he arrived at the depths of the mana fluctuations in an instant. After arriving here, he didn't go any further because he had a feeling that if he went any further, he would definitely alarm that existence. He had no intention of becoming enemies with it. He stood still and looked inside. He immediately saw a figure there, but as he looked deeper, he saw something else. Where the origin heart was, there seemed to be a lotus floating there. Although it was only for a moment, he could see it clearly. That thing wasn't a primordial treasure, nor was it a magic treasure, but it gave him a mysterious feeling. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Just as he was about to try to see it more clearly, he sensed something. Turning around, he saw Ancestor Yao Han standing in front of Busu. He knew that something must have happened, and he wouldn't let this person enter this world. Thus, with a thought, he appeared in front of this person and said, "What brings you here, fellow Taoist?" Ancestor Yao Han saw him appear and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I came here on the orders of fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang. I have an important matter to discuss with fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "Is it the matter we discussed last time?" Taoist Yao Han didn't answer directly, but smiled and said, "I remember after we defeated that existence, I once asked fellow Taoist if someone wanted to protect that existence's avatar and tried to bring it into this world. What would fellow Taoist do?" Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he said, "Does fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang have such intentions?" Taoist Yao Han said, "I came here on behalf of fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang. Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang said that if fellow Taoist can't restrict your fellow Taoists and can only delay the merger, then he can only bring that existence's avatar into this world to prevent this from happening." Zhang Yan thought about it. Ji Zhuang should know the severity of this matter. If he wasn't using this as a threat, then he must be confident that he has a way to restrain that existence. However, he couldn't ignore this matter. After all, that existence was defeated by him and the Taoist with the sword. If Ji Zhuang Daoren really has a way to restrain it, then he must explain it clearly. Even if it is possible, he must send people to keep an eye on it at all times to prevent any unforeseen events. But if fellow Taoist is unwilling, then he must stop him. He said, "In I's opinion, if fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang insists on doing this, I hope that he can clearly explain the method used to restrain that existence. This way, not only can I be at ease, but I can also give an explanation to the Taoist who fought that existence with me that day." Taoist Yao Han said, "I will inform fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang of your words, word for word." "But what if he is unwilling?" Zhang Yan smiled, "If that really happens, fellow Taoist knows what I will do." Ancestor Yao Han chuckled and cupped his hands in greeting before disappearing without a trace. Ancestor Yao Han quickly returned to the Mirror Lake. When he saw Ji Zhuang Daoren, he told him about Zhang Yan's request. Ji Zhuang Daoren didn't say anything, only saying, "Thank you for your trouble this time, fellow Taoist." Ancestor Yao Han laughed, "Fellow Taoist is too kind. It's just a few words, it doesn't take much effort." After he left, Ji Zhuang Daoren frowned. Zhang Yan wanted him to tell him how to restrain that existence, but he didn't want to agree. If he told him the real reason, it wouldn't just be Zhang Yan, everyone else would oppose him as well. So before he succeeded, he couldn't reveal it. But he had to do it, because it was almost impossible for him to find that thing on his own. He thought, Ancestor Yao Han, Sky-Reaching, and Xian Che can't be trusted, so I have to do it myself. Now that I have the protection of the Mirror Lake, Taoist Zhang won't be able to control me. Once I succeed, he will have no choice but to agree to my original request. The most difficult part was that if he went to find that existence's avatar, Zhang Yan might stop him. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't hide this matter, he wouldn't have discussed it with Zhang Yan. He thought, I won't go find that existence, but I can make that existence look for me. This way, I can avoid this junior's detection. But how do I lure it here? After Ancestor Yao Han left, Zhang Yan didn't go to the source of the mana fluctuations. Instead, he turned his consciousness back to his body. Earlier, he had a feeling that something was about to happen. He thought that it would be a conflict between this junior and that person, but from the looks of it, this matter was going to happen here. He thought, from now on, I have to pay attention to the movements there. If there's any movement to find that existence, I have to stop it. Otherwise, if this junior accepted that existence's avatar into the Mirror Lake and had no way to suppress it, the matter would become irreversible. Just as he was thinking, he sensed something and looked towards the Shaoqing sect's muddy sky. Previously, he couldn't see through the door of two realms. This should be due to the Shaoqing sect's founding master's concealment. Out of courtesy, he didn't forcefully peek. But just now, as people entered and exited the door, the scene behind was revealed. Although there wasn't a land of creation, there was a fragment. The fragment of creation in the Shaoqing sect's domain should belong to the Shaoqing sect. But not to mention the cultivators in the Mirror Lake who were looking for it. Even if that existence stopped devouring everything, it definitely wouldn't let go of the essence of creation. If he left it here and didn't take it, he might be targeted by it in the future. He pondered for a moment, then with a thought, a strand of his consciousness fell into the heaven realm. If the Shaoqing sect's founding master's consciousness incarnation was here, he would retreat. But if not, he could use his consciousness to protect that place. This could ensure that the item wouldn't be lost. After doing this, a thought came to his mind. Back then, among the 4 great sects of the 9 continents, perhaps each of the patriarchs had arranged a similar boundary for their descendants and disciples. Now, the Qinsang sect and the Shaoqing sect's muddy skies had appeared one after another. The 2 muddy skies that seemed to belong to the Yuxiao sect and the Netherworld Spring sect had yet to appear. Putting aside the Netherworld Spring sect's muddy skies, as for the Yuxiao schools, he thought, if the Yaohan ancestor isn't his entire person, then it's very likely that he doesn't know where these muddy skies are. Otherwise, there's no need for him to seek shelter in the Mirror Lake. He could directly find the location of the creation and become the master of a region. He made a deduction. After the Shaoqing sect's muddy sky passed, it wouldn't take more than 10 years for the next muddy sky to arrive. At that time, everything would be clear. Chapter 2108. After Zhang Yan sent out a strand of his consciousness, he discovered that the world where the essence of creation resided was empty. No mighty figure's consciousness incarnation had landed there. Even the Shaoqing patriarch's incarnation did not exist. He was not too surprised by this result because it was in line with the Shaoqing sect's way of doing things. It was more convenient for the junior disciples to be in dangerous situations at any time, so that they could train their Tao heart. The many gates of 2 realms that were opened in muddy heaven were obviously set up for this purpose. He even suspected that the patriarch established the Shaoqing sect in the 9 continents so that the juniors could find opponents of the same level, and not for any other purpose. Actually, if this continued for a long time, it would be very difficult for the sect to develop and strengthen. But at the same time, cultivators who were able to survive in such a dangerous environment, even if not all of them were outstanding, their combat strength wouldn't be weak. He secretly guessed that perhaps the Shaoqing patriarch hoped that one of the juniors could become a spirit refinement cultivator and jump out of the current world. That way, they could support each other and become opponents. His consciousness circled the realms opposite the Shaoqing muddy heaven. After seeing that there was nothing else worth paying attention to, he retracted his thoughts and recalled the lotus shadow he saw at the source of spiritual opportunity. Due to the collision of magic power between spirit refinement cultivators, apart from some secrets that would be deliberately concealed, there were no secrets about ordinary things. If one person knew about something, then those with similar cultivation would also know about it. However, at this moment, he was unable to find any clues related to this lotus illusory image. It was either something that wasn't worth mentioning, or it had already surpassed his current level. If it was the latter, then only a person of a higher level would know its secrets. Since he had never met such a figure, then he naturally had no way of knowing. However, the moment he saw that item, he could not help but think of the lotus cup left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Although the level of this item was at most in the true Yang realm, the patriarch might have intentionally or unintentionally made it look like this to imply something. If that was really the case, then perhaps the matter related to this item was far beyond what he originally thought. Just as he was thinking, he felt a wave of spiritual power coming towards him. He turned around and saw a jade talisman of spiritual light land outside of Busu's sky. With a thought, he took it in front of him and realized that it was Jizhuang Doran's reply. When he opened it, he saw that because this matter involved the secrets of his own cultivation, he couldn't reveal the method to restrain that existence's divine avatar. However, since Zhang Yan didn't agree, considering the overall situation, he would put this matter aside for now and discuss it with him again when the time was right. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, but he did not believe Jizhuang's words. He could feel that Jizhuang Daoran was very resolute about this matter and would definitely take action. He would not give up just because of others of his disagreement. This letter was nothing more than to re off of his heart. He immediately separated a strand of his consciousness to monitor this place, then he withdrew his consciousness and entered a meditative state. In a flash, another 10 years passed in the inner realm. One day, a divine light descended from the lower realm. It flew to the front of the Qinghuan Palace and floated there motionlessly. Jing Yu went forward to take it and realized that it was sent by Qinsang School. He immediately walked into the hall and walked up the jade stairs to the altar. He presented it with both hands and said, "Master, the sect sent a letter." Zhang Yan looked down at the letter, and it flew up to land on the table, where it unfurled in front of him. The letter mentioned that the Mountain and Sea Grand Competition pageant was over. There was no question that the cultivators of the Mountain and Sea realm had the upper hand in this magical discussion. Although they did have the advantage of being on home ground, it was only a slight advantage. As for the cultivators of the other realms who had been defeated, they knew that even if they fought in other places, their chances of winning would still be very low. After the competition, the cultivators of the Mountain and Sea realm had become famous. The various sects and clans had seen the methods of the cultivators of the other realms, and were now eager to establish their own sects in the various heavens. They would spread their Taoist magics far and wide, and the Qinsang school had similar plans. As the spiritual opportunity continued to rise, and the number of demons and devils in the various realms increased, many of the cultivators of the other realms found it difficult to deal with them. Therefore, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now that Zhang Yan had performed such meritorious service, he didn't need to worry about such mundane matters. However, he was still Temple Lord Du Zhen, and as a matter of routine, he had to use his seal. That was especially true because the people who were going to the other realms could not have a low cultivation base. Therefore, when the sect decided to send people to the other realms, it involved several of his own disciples. Therefore, he had to be consulted. He looked out into the real world, and in the blink of an eye, he understood everything that was going on there. Actually, that wasn't the only problem for the sects and clans. Although the number of people who could pry into the workings of heaven had gradually decreased, it wasn't that there were fewer of them. Rather, it was that they knew how to conceal themselves. That was because the matter of capturing those who could pry into the workings of heaven itself had become a part of the workings of heaven. After some people saw what would happen to them in the future, they naturally knew that they should conceal themselves instead of casually divulging what they saw. Bai Wei and Deng Zhang were stirring up trouble, planning all day long on how to use this point to sow discord among the people. However, whether it was the sects and clans of the Mountain and Sea realm expanding or the demons stirring up trouble behind the scenes, he wouldn't interfere, nor would he speak out to warn them. That was because the more the forces in the world stirred up karma, the easier it was for the profound stones to enter the world. After he used his seal on the letter, he raised his sleeve and sent it back. Inside the mirror lake, Jizhuang Daoren sat motionlessly on the platform. Over the past few years, in order to lower Zhang Yan's wariness, he didn't do anything on the surface, but in reality, he had been secretly releasing waves of magic power to search for that existence's divine clone. Ever since that existence's divine primordial spirit was split into 3, the remaining 2 divine clones didn't dare to show themselves. This was because they were afraid of being devoured by the original master's divine primordial spirit. However, in order to change this situation, they would definitely try to strengthen themselves. The simplest method would be to devour the fragments of the essence of creation or to enter the land of creation. However, these 2 things weren't easy to find, so he deduced that the 2 divine clones were currently traversing through the countless real worlds, avoiding the pursuit of the original master's divine primordial spirit and searching for resources. The real world was constantly being created and destroyed by the refined spirit Weili. If someone with a certain level of skill deliberately hid themselves, it would be very difficult to find their whereabouts. Over the past few days, his search had been fruitless, and he knew that this method wouldn't work. It seems like I can only do as I thought before and try to make them come to me. In order to attract their attention, I need to be bait. He decided to use the fragments of the essence of creation to lure them over. As for the possibility of attracting the original master's divine primordial spirit, he wasn't afraid. In his opinion, with Bushutian watching, if that existence appeared, then Zhang Yan would definitely appear to stop it. As long as the two divine clones appeared, he didn't need to do anything. He only needed to send the message that he was willing to protect them, and then he could wait for them to come to him. However, this matter couldn't be hidden from the people below. Even though it wasn't difficult for him to suppress this generation, when it involved that existence, he had to give them a heads up. Otherwise, there might be a loophole in the future. After making his decision, he ordered people to invite Yao Han, Towering Firmament, and the others over. After everyone had arrived, he briefly explained what he wanted to do. Finally, he asked, "What do you all think about this?" Ancestor Yao Han already knew about this matter. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist is doing this for everyone's consideration. Since Taoist Zhang isn't willing to let Bushutian's fellow Taoists seal their cultivation, then fellow Taoist using this method to restrain that existence is understandable." Sky-reaching Peak also said, "Fellow Taoist's method is not wrong. None of us are willing to be swallowed by that existence." Jizhuang Daoran asked, and the result was that everyone agreed. However, he frowned slightly. If these people objected on the spot, then it would be easy to deal with them. However, none of them said anything. It was clear that they all had their own plans. He felt that things wouldn't go so smoothly in the future. However, no matter what these people thought in private, this matter had to be done. It was fine as long as they didn't obstruct him now. He said, "Since everyone has no objections, then this matter is decided. When I do this, if Bushutian comes to obstruct me, I hope that everyone can help me." Everyone expressed that they would advance and retreat together with him when the time came. After Jizhuang Daoran finished explaining this matter, he dismissed everyone. After Daoist Rendu returned, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong, so he went to find Daoist Towering Sky and said, "Jizhuang wants to draw that existence's soul into the mirror lake. Do you really think it's possible?" Sky-reaching Peak said meaningfully, "I think there is some confidence. Jizhuang isn't stupid enough to send his territory into that existence's mouth. However, the premise is that it is as he said." He thought that although Jizhuang Daoran had informed everyone in advance, just now, everyone present could see that this matter wasn't the existence's real goal. It was just a cover for something else. However, no one knew what this existence wanted to do. Now that everyone needed to protect the mirror lake, it was useless to object. Instead, they might be targeted, so no one objected at that time. However, it should be noted that that existence had devoured everything after all. Even if its avatar came, it would still pose a great threat to them. If Jizhuang could not suppress it, then things would not be as peaceful as they were today. Daoist Rendu thought about it and asked, "Do you think the thing you took that day has something to do with this matter?" Sky-reaching Peak said, "Perhaps it is, but I don't know. Since Jizhuang dared to reveal this matter to us, he probably isn't afraid of us finding out anything." As the two of them were talking, Daoist Heaven Reach sensed a stream of godwill. It was none other than Patriarch Yao Han. Eyes glittering, Daoist Heaven Reach decided that this person had come looking for him. With a thought, he allowed the person to enter. Chapter 2109. After greeting everyone, Jizhuang Daoran did not pay any more attention to them. Although he knew that they must be plotting something behind his back, as long as he firmly controlled the mirror lake, he did not have to worry about anything in the short term. Once he succeeded, he would not need to care about their attitude. He sat down on the platform and took out a fragment of the essence of good fortune. In order to attract that existence's avatar, he could not do it too deliberately. Thus, this fragment had to be found by him and could not be delivered to him. Moreover, after he placed it outside, he could not let Bushutian discover its exact location. After calculating for a while, he tossed the fragment of the essence of creation into the void and pushed it into a place in the real world. At the same time, he used his own Fa Li to push out the Fa Li and Qi of the people around him. Although this caused a bit of a commotion, it could alert the existence and he could hide himself. Even if Bushutian knew what he was doing, he would not know where the fragment was. After doing this, he sat down and waited for the existence's avatar to arrive. Ever since Zhang Yan knew of the plan, he had not let his guard down. At this moment, when he felt a fluctuation of Fa Li, how could he not know that the existence could not help but make a move? Such a large fluctuation of Fa Li was clearly used to conceal the real movement behind it. But even if he did not deliberately remove the layer of concealment, he could almost guess what the other party was using at this moment. It was nothing more than using something like the fragment of the essence of creation to attract the existence's avatar, and then trying to lure it into the mirror lake. Ji Zhuang thought that he had done it very cleverly, but he did not know that he had a magic tool left behind by the great underworld patriarch. It might be very difficult to find the fragment of the essence of creation, but under the premise of knowing some clues, the possibility of finding it was greatly increased. With a thought from Zhang Yan, an object that looked like a scroll floated down from the sky. Then, two big hands came down from the sky, each holding a scroll on the left and right. They slowly separated the scrolls, and spiritual light seeped out from within, revealing the void and the life and death of all worlds in front of them. His gaze fell and he calculated with his heart. It didn't take long before he found the location of the good fortune fragment. His mind immediately focused on that place, and as his magic power surged over, an avatar of his consciousness appeared in this world. Jizhuang Doran's consciousness incarnation was hidden here. Suddenly, he felt a wave of Fa Li invading him, and he immediately knew that something was wrong. He had originally been waiting for that existence's divine clone to come over so that he could convey his intentions to that person. That was why he had left a door there. However, he had never expected that Zhang Yan would come to him first. He said in a deep voice, "Fellow, what are you doing here?" Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "I came here to ask fellow, why did you put the fragment of the essence of creation in this present world?" Jizhuang Daoran said expressionlessly, "This is just for cultivation, and it is my own business. You must know that this is not Busu Tian. Fellow, don't you think it is too unreasonable for you to come here and question me for no reason?" Zhang Yan smiled and didn't expose him. He said, "Fellow Taoist, you shouldn't be unaware of this. With the fragment of the essence of creation here, it won't be long before that existence is drawn over. If this fragment is swallowed, it will only strengthen its might for no reason, and it will be even more difficult to deal with in the future. So how can I turn a blind eye to it?" Jizhuang Daoran said, "Fellow, you worry too much. Since I am here for cultivation, I will naturally not let it fall into the hands of that existence." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "This matter involves the safety of all fellow Taoists and endangers the survival of everyone. Fellow Taoists' words alone do not carry enough weight. Since I've returned, I will naturally not let fellow Taoist continue. I hope that fellow Taoist can understand the overall situation and stop here." Jizhuang Daoran frowned and said coldly, "If I do not comply, are you going to fight me?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "If fellow Taoist insists, then I might have no choice but to use some tricks. But don't worry, even if I destroy this clone of yours later, I won't take this fragment of fortune. So long as fellow Taoist doesn't do the same thing again, then I'll naturally return it to you." Jizhuang Daoran pondered for a while. He could tell that there was no room for negotiation. He could only kill Zhang Yan's avatar and defend this place with all his strength to prevent it from entering again. After making up his mind, he immediately used his magic power to suppress Zhang Yan's avatar. A moment later, inside Busu Tian, Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. Just now, everything that happened in the inner realm had entered his mind. He opened his hand and a fragment of the essence of creation appeared. However, he also knew that Jizhuang Daoran should have more than one fragment. However, after suffering this loss, Jizhuang Daoran would not try this again. In the mirror lake, Taoist Jizhuang, who was sitting on the platform, trembled slightly. At that moment, he also felt that his consciousness incarnation had been broken and the fragment of the essence of creation had been taken away. His expression immediately turned ugly. He did not care too much about the fragment. Just as Zhang Yan had thought, he naturally had more than one fragment. However, he did not understand what method Zhang Yan had used to find him. If he did not figure out the reason, then no matter how many fragments he threw outside, they would only be taken by Zhang Yan. It looked like this path was not working, so he could only think of another way. He pondered for a long time and found that if he simply left the fragment outside, then no matter what method he used, Zhang Yan would be one step ahead of him and stop him. In this case, he could only do it himself. He took out another fragment and focused his mind. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a celestial artifact that could be used to conceal himself. Then, he created a clone and entered the void silence. The magic tool formed by the fragment of creation could not only conceal his aura, but it could also return to the fragment at any time. As long as that existence's avatar came looking for him, he could give the fragment to the other party to express his sincerity. Of course, it was also possible that the Master of Divine Origin had found this place first, but it did not matter. As long as he put the fragment into his divine will in advance, he would not be afraid of losing it. At most, he could just send another avatar. In this case, at most, that existence would find the location of his mirror lake by following his aura. Now, he was not afraid of exposing this place, because even if that existence was at its peak, it would not be easy to attack this place. Now that the Master of Divine Origin had split, it would be even more impossible for him to do so. Most importantly, right now, it was only his avatar wandering outside, and he only had a protective magic tool with him, so there was no reason for Zhang Yan to stop him. Zhang Yan knew that Ji Zhuang would not give up just like that. At this moment, he saw that Ji Zhuang was moving again, and he was not surprised at all. He immediately turned to look, only to find that this person actually went out personally, and his aura seemed to be faintly discernible, as if it was blocked by something. If he did not calculate, it would be difficult to sense the specific whereabouts. He thought about it, and already guessed what the other party wanted to do. Right now, he indeed had no reason to restrict the other's movements, but this was actually not a problem, because if the other party's avatar could go into the silence, so could his avatar. All he needed to do was to watch the other party from the side. However, the problem here was that once the existence's avatar appeared, even if he went up to stop it, it would be useless, because at that time, Zhizhuang Daoren only needed to send a thought over, and it would be considered to have achieved half of his goal. After that, he only needed to wait for the other party to take the initiative to find him. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Although this person had a good plan, he still miscalculated one thing. With a thought, he also sent an avatar to go into the silence, and then immediately mobilized the Bushutian Weili into his body, and raised his Fa Li again. In the silence, the Fa Li that belonged to him immediately surged. That being had retreated after his primordial spirit was split into three. The main reason was to avoid him and the sword-wielding Taoist. Now that he was in the void, it was almost impossible for that being to appear before him before his power had recovered, or rather, before he could devour the two primordial spirits, it was almost impossible for him to appear before him again. This was because this existence also understood that if his divine vitality was divided again, even if he could still recover, who knew how long it would take. After noticing Zhang Yan's actions, Zhizhuang Daoren immediately understood the latter's intentions, and his face could not help but turn a little ugly. He frowned and pondered for a long time, then waved his sleeve and opened the surrounding restrictions again. Then he stood up and went to a high place, bowing to the platform. A moment later, a jade mirror appeared out of nowhere, and in it, a figure that looked like him was reflected. He bowed and said, "Fellow, I am now in a difficult situation, so I have no choice but to disturb you again. In order to find the existence's avatar, I can only ask you to calculate for me." The figure in the mirror still did not move, but Zhizhuang Daoren seemed to have heard something, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. He nodded repeatedly, and in the end, he bowed again and said, "I understand, thank you for solving my doubts, fellow." When Zhizhuang Daoren raised his head, he found that the figure had already dissipated like smoke. His expression slightly froze. This time, after the appearance of this person in the mirror, he had used up more than half of the essence qi he obtained last time, and the remaining could barely be used to suppress that existence's avatar. If he wanted to summon it again, he would have to find that thing, so he would not be able to get much help from here for the time being. With a thought, he created another avatar, and it still went into the silence. Because that existence's avatar had jumped between many worlds, the divination this time was only about the worlds that person had been to. However, he could follow this clue and chase after it, but he would not be able to find its location. As long as he could find the remaining Fa Li Qi, then he only needed to obtain the creation fragment and merge it into the world, then he would be able to draw out the consciousness avatar, and once he saw it, his goal would be achieved. As for Zhang Yan, even if he could still catch up to him this time, he would still be a step behind him. Chapter 21:10. When Zhang Yan saw that Zhizhuang Daoren had sent another clone outside, he knew that Zhizhuang Daoren was still unwilling to give up and was making another move. Since he could not enter the Mirror Lake at the moment, he could only deal with it accordingly and stop Zhizhuang Daoren from acting rashly. He made some calculations in his mind and realized that Zhizhuang Daoren's clone that came out this time did not carry the fragment of the essence of creation. However, this did not mean that he did not need to care about it. It should be known that the other clone's ritual implement could be returned and sent here using the will of the god. He could feel that Zhizhuang's action this time was different from the previous 2 times. He had a great purpose, and it seemed that he already knew where that existence's soul clone was. If that was really the case, he would not be able to stop him no matter what if he used ordinary methods. The simplest way was to kill the doppelganger. Although this could temporarily solve the problem, firstly, the 2 sides were still maintaining harmony on the surface. Secondly, Zhizhuang Daoren should still have some tricks up his sleeves that he had not used because of some reason. If he openly offended him now, it would only cause him to completely throw away his scruples. However, if there was really no way to stop him, he did not mind doing this. However, he had not reached that step yet. With a thought in his mind, the Qinghong sword pill shook, and a spiritual light appeared in an instant. In the next moment, it had already escaped into the silence and chased after Zhizhuang Daoren. Not only that, wherever his aura went, there would be sword lights falling. Before this sword was completed, it could already observe that existence's mana waves. Now that the sword was completed, it was even less difficult to do this. This sword light followed Zhizhuang Daoren all the way. As long as there was an external aura, it would immediately go forward and destroy it. In the eyes of that existence, Zhizhuang Daoren was an enemy. Under such circumstances, he would only think that Zhizhuang Daoren was pursuing him. Why would he take the initiative to show himself? At this time, Zhizhuang Daoren also noticed that Zhang Yan's mana and qi activity had already caught up to him. However, he did not stop, nor did he try to turn around to stop him. Doing so was almost useless other than wasting his mana. Now, he thought that after finding that existence's mana fluctuation, he would be able to achieve his goal one step ahead. No matter what, Zhang Yan would not be able to stop him, so he simply ignored it. Following the guidance of the man in the mirror, he soon found the source of the fluctuation of magic power. He immediately returned the artifact to the fragment of the essence of creation and transmitted it into the divine will. At the same time, he opened up the present world and prepared to receive the magic power machine. However, before the consciousness incarnation could condense into form, a strand of sword light flashed through space and instantly slashed apart this vital energy. Naturally, Zhizhuang Daoren opened up more than one present world. However, at the same time, the thousands of present worlds that were involved in the fluctuation of magic power were all slashed apart by countless sword lights. His expression changed. He did not expect Zhang Yan to be able to catch up to him this time. Not only that, the residual mana fluctuation of the consciousness was being swept away by Zhang Yan's sword qi. Seeing that it was about to be cleaned up, he hurriedly took out a purple bottle gourd and captured a wisp of qi activity from outside and put it into it. Although it did not seem to be of any use, he would not return empty-handed this time. Seeing that things could not be done, he was afraid that the fragment of the essence of creation would be taken away again. This time, he did not force himself. He directly dissipated the 2 clones and then returned his consciousness to the original body. He frowned deeply, knowing that this matter could not continue. At the moment, almost all the methods he could think of were blocked by the opponent. If he wanted to break through the encirclement head-on, he was afraid that he would never be able to do so without first getting rid of Zhang Yan. However, just as Zhang Yan could not attack into the mirror lake, he similarly could not do anything to Bu Shutian. Moreover, if they really fought, his side might not be Bu Shutian's opponent. This was one of the reasons why he had been restraining himself on the surface. Now it seemed that it was difficult to do this in a hurry. Now, he could only use his own magic power to ripple through the void to search for the fragment of the essence of creation or the land of creation. Then, he would see if he could find that existence's consciousness while searching for such things. This matter depended on his own fate, but similarly, no one could stop him. Although he had collected a wisp of the existence's consciousness just now left behind before he retreated, he could only use it just now during a head-on battle. The scattered wisp of qi was not very useful. For example, those of the same generation who had entered the eternal silence would also leave behind a wisp of qi, but it was impossible to find them with this. Cultivators who were still active in the void would sense it in advance, and unless they were willing, they would not let the pursuer succeed. However, if he released this wisp of qi when he was searching for the essence of creation, it might attract the other party's attention and cause them to take the initiative to find him. Although the hope was a little slim, there was always a glimmer of hope. However, just now's series of actions had caused the relationship between them to become tense. He was afraid that if he continued, Zhang Yan would directly turn against him, so he decided to temporarily stop. It would not be too late to do this after the situation eased up a bit. Although Daoist Sky Reaching and the others were inside the mirror lake, just now had seen the battle between the two of them. The result was undoubtedly Jizhuang Doran's defeat. He first revealed a mocking expression, then a hint of fear. It was not difficult to see that Daoist Jizhuang did not make any mistakes in this battle. Even if he had been in Zhang Yan's place, he might not have been able to do better. However, he was still restrained by Zhang Yan in every way. Even if the two of them were on the same level, it was not difficult to see that Daoist Jizhuang was completely vulnerable in the battle. Daoist Rendu said, "I wonder what Jizhuang will do after returning in defeat." Daoist Sky Reaching said, "In truth, if Jizhuang fails this time, the inner realm will be at peace." Daoist Sky Reaching nodded. This person was determined to bring the avatar here. No one objected, but he dared to say that no one agreed. If he really brought the avatar here, everyone in the mirror lake would be in danger. Now that his plan had failed, it was a good thing for everyone. He hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Just now Yao Han is here. What did he say to fellow Daoist?" Daoist Sky Reaching said, "The situation is not yet decided, so why would he say anything? This person would not leave behind such evidence. Just now Yao Han is only saying some secretive words to leave some hints." In truth, there was one thing he didn't say. The Yao Han ancestor had vaguely revealed that in order to prevent the avatar from entering the land of fortune, he had made some sort of agreement with Zhang Yan. It was difficult for him to determine if this was true or not, but if it was true, then if all the cultivators in the inner realm joined forces to deal with Jizhuang and Daoist Zhang attacked from the outside, the mirror lake might really change owners. However, although he didn't think that Jizhuang would be able to keep his position as the master of the mirror lake, he still felt like there was something hidden behind him. In particular, he still didn't know what Jizhuang's goal was, so he made up his mind that no matter what happened in the mirror lake, he wasn't going to get involved. Even if the Yao Han ancestor really became the master, they would still need to deal with Bu Su Tian. He didn't need to worry too much about this and would just watch the situation change. When Zhang Yan saw that Jizhuang Daoran had retreated, he also withdrew his avatar and the clear dawn sword pill. He knew that the other party wouldn't stop because of this, but if the other party insisted on doing this, he wouldn't be so polite anymore. Every time an avatar appeared, he would kill it. However, what surprised him was that after this, Jizhuang Daoran didn't do anything like this again. It was as if he had become completely silent. Seeing this, he calmed his mind and went back to meditating. Right now, he had left a wisp of his divine sense there, so no matter what the other party wanted to do, he would be able to detect it. After sitting there for 10 years, he suddenly opened his eyes. At that moment, he felt that Taoist Ji Zhuang's dermic power ripples in the void were much stronger than before, and the trend was becoming more and more obvious. After observing for a while, he knew the other party's plan. However, if the other party didn't want to have a falling out with the other party, this was the only choice if the other party wanted to achieve his goal. This was equivalent to giving up on the idea of coming into contact with that existence's divine clone. He only hoped to bump into that existence while searching for the essence of creation. Because everything here depended on one's own luck and opportunities, he could not stop it. Unless he could block the other party in the mirror lake and prevent the other party's fluctuations from leaking out. In reality, with his magic power, he could indeed do such a thing, but he could not seal it forever, because once that existence returned and began to devour everything, he would definitely have to go up and stop it. Moreover, this would require him to pour a large portion of his magic power into it, and he would not be able to continue his cultivation. If Jizhuang Daoren persisted like this, he actually had a chance to succeed. Because refining the soul didn't matter if it was life or death, as long as the other party didn't change his mind, he would encounter the other party sooner or later. If he wanted to stop it, he would have to break the mirror lake and suppress it or force it into the eternal stillness. He couldn't help but think about Ancestor Yao Han's suggestion. The latter's intention was clearly to replace the other party and become the master of the mirror lake. If he worked together with Ancestor Yao Han, he would have a chance to overturn Jizhuang Daoren. However, after thinking about it, he didn't think it was a good choice. Ancestor Yao Han had hidden himself very well, and he might have a bigger plan. At the very least, he was very clear about Jizhuang Daoren's goal. However, if he replaced Ancestor Yao Han, things would become even more difficult to deal with. If he didn't use this method, he could only speed up his cultivation. If he was strong enough, he wouldn't have to worry about these things. After entering the second stage, he had been constantly unraveling the unknown. He didn't know how long it would take for him to reach a higher stage. However, he still had another path to take. All this time, he had been cultivating both qi and power. Since he couldn't see a future in the qi path, he might as well try the strength path. If he could reach the next stage in the strength path, he wouldn't be much stronger, but at least he would have more ways to deal with enemies. Chapter 21:11. The next level of the strength path was the 8th gate, which was equivalent to the level of qi path and spirit refinement. If one wanted to cultivate this kind of transcendence technique, it was also dependent on fate. If a cultivator did not care about this, although it was not impossible to reach the upper realm, there would be many obstacles in the process of cultivation, either from the outside or because of oneself. For people like Zhang Yan, their words and actions had their own mysteries. At this moment, he felt that he could try to enter this realm, which meant that this was the right time. After he achieved spirit refinement, he had already transcended the present world. Because his strength path body was still restricted by the present world, it was still guarding the gate of heaven and earth. In the eyes of the true Yang experts, this mysterious and unfathomable demon master Qi Zhou had never shown himself. Moreover, guarding the door of 2 realms was obviously necessary, so they naturally wouldn't go and provoke him. Moreover, demon masters like Qi Yao and the others were rather fearful of him, so they wouldn't easily come into contact with him. At this moment, his gaze turned and looked towards the anti-heaven and earth. From his current point of view, there was no longer anything profound about this place. At the end of the day, the anti-heaven and earth was still entrusted to Bushutian, but there was one difference. The Kunshur continent and even the various worlds belonged to the positive heaven and earth, and they were all entrusted to the Yang side, while the anti-heaven and earth was entrusted to the Yin side. But he had already seen that most of Bushutian's Yin Qi had disappeared, and he did not know where it went, so the anti-heaven and earth had only merged with a small amount of it. And the indescribable thing that existed here was actually related to Bushutian's Yin Weili. It was not the Yin Weili itself, but formed by the fluctuations of the Weili's aura. But even so, it was not simple. Back then, he had only borrowed a little, and he had used it to achieve Strength Path Stage 7. He believed that if he wanted to go up, he would have to find the Yin Weili. As he thought of this, he followed this aura to find it. But after this search, there was no result. As he had seen before, there seemed to be only a small amount of the Een Whaley, and most of it was completely gone. As he pondered, he mobilized the Whaley in his body to observe the situation, but he soon realized that it was not feasible. After some calculations, he understood that the key was the strange force that was immersed in Bushtian. If it was not completely removed, Yin and Yang would not be able to merge into one, and he would not be able to see the complete Whaley. However, the auras left by the ancestral masters and Qi Lu's master could be considered as strange forces. With his current ability, he couldn't expel these auras. This was a bit contradictory. If one didn't get rid of the strange force, it would be hard to see the door, but if one didn't enter the door, it would be hard to get rid of the strange force. He pondered for a moment. Since the owner of the demonic treasury had left behind this cultivation method, no matter what his motive was, he wouldn't have blocked the path here. He probably couldn't use the Qi path to explore this place. Perhaps he could only use the strength path to search for these things, and only then would he be able to see the true wonders of this place. Thinking of this, he immediately separated a strand of consciousness and sank it into the strength path avatar. At the same time, he cut off the connection between it and his main body, so that his Qi path Whaley wouldn't be mixed in. Before the gate of inside-out heaven and earth, the strength path avatar opened its eyes and felt an endless stream of strange things flowing into its body, increasing its cultivation. From his current point of view, even if his Fa Li could grow infinitely, he would never be able to transcend and appear outside the world. Purely in terms of strength path cultivation, this strange thing was just a step to a higher level, but not the root. If he could use this to get in touch with the Whaley on the other side of Bushtian's side, he might be able to see the method to advance to the 8th gate. He immediately sat cross-legged and sank his consciousness into the depths of inside-out heaven and earth. Everything around him became quiet, but he didn't lose focus, letting his consciousness wander around, and didn't deliberately guide it. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly saw a dim light in the endless darkness. His heart couldn't help but move, and he threw himself into it. In the next moment, his strength path avatar suddenly disappeared. In the heavenly demon realm, Qi Yao, Yun Su, and Heng Jing were cultivating. Ever since they reached a compromise with the human path, they had been hiding here, and said that they would only participate in the fight for the Zhouhuanyuan Jade. Apart from that, they wouldn't be involved in anything related to the human path. Suddenly, they felt an unknown thing rushing toward them, and even their cultivation was rising. The three of them were shocked, and immediately looked toward inside-out heaven and earth, but found that it was empty. The figure that was originally standing there was nowhere to be seen. Heng Jing said in surprise, "Where did Demon Lord Qi Zhou go?" This Demon Lord Qi Zhou could be said to be the #1 demon lord in the world, and he guarded the gate of heaven and earth all year round, so that the main-out heaven and earth wouldn't clash too much. Ever since they entered the world, they had never seen him move, and they thought that this would continue. Now that he had disappeared, they instantly realized that something big was about to happen. At this time, the three of them were a little flustered. They had always believed that the human path had never killed them all because they were afraid of this demon master. Therefore, even if this demon master had never fought against them, as long as he stood there, he would be a pillar of support. If he was not here, the human path might not be as polite to them as it was now. Qi Yao stared closely at inside-out heaven and earth. Just now, he seemed to have felt something, but it also seemed like there was nothing. He thought to himself, where did he go? However, his attention was quickly diverted by another matter, because after the barrier was lost, a force of collision was naturally born between the main-out heaven and earth. The consciousness of the 6 demon lords that had not been awakened suddenly changed, and 3 of them were instantly wiped out, but there were still 3 demon lords that remained. Along with the pouring of an unknown object, they came to the main-out heaven and earth one by one, and based on the mana and chi dynamic of the 3 people, they immediately obtained a body to stay in the world. Then, with a change of chi dynamic, they all came to where the 3 people were. Qi Yao and the others also felt it, and looked over. They saw 3 figures appear in front of them, and the one in front was a high-spirited young man. He cupped his hands at the three people and said, Ling Jiong greets the three fellow Taoists. On the right of the young man stood a tall and cold man, who faintly cupped his hands and said, Dear friend. The last person was a seductive woman. She tidied her hair, bowed to the people in front of her, and said with a smile, I am Jian Tong, three fellow Taoists greet me. Chi Yao and the others also returned the greeting. Ling Jiong said loudly, Everyone, the six of us have left Yuan Tian and entered the world. It is the heavens that have allowed our Tao to flourish. From now on, the three of you don't have to compromise in front of the Tao anymore. As a demon lord, he naturally learned what had happened from Chi Yao and the others as soon as he came out of the anti-heaven. Chi Yao dared not be interested in this, and responded calmly, So what? When the heartless Taoists were still around, were we weak? Weren't we still defeated by the Tao one by one? If we hadn't reacted in time, I'm afraid we would have ended up the same way. Ling Jiong said confidently, The heartless Taoists and even the demons are not on the same side as the three of you. It's already good enough that they don't plot against each other when they fight. How many tricks can they use? But we, on the other hand, are of the same origin. When we work together, we are far superior to them. Chi Yao shook his head and said, Just now that the three of you have entered the world, you don't know the power of the Tao Grand Cultivators, especially that priest Zhang. Even priest Daoi was suppressed by him. How can you fight against them without a connate supreme treasure? Although Ling Jiao knew about the past and most people and things, the information about Zhang Yan was vague, as if this person did not exist. Now that Chi Yao mentioned it, he also felt that something was wrong. He frowned and stopped thinking about it. He only said, That primordial cardinal treasure is indeed powerful, but it's not like we don't have a way to deal with it. At this point, he smiled mysteriously and said, The three of you can carefully sense it. Chi Yao's heart shook. Because the barrier between the two realms was broken, the consciousness of 6 demon lords had been worn away by the power of calamity. But when he looked again, he found that the consciousness did not completely dissipate. Instead, it condensed in one place when the two realms collided, and seemed to be attracting something. This is, Ling Jiong showed a hint of pride and said, This treasure is the condensation of the essence of the anti-heaven and earth. It came according to the obsession of the 6 demon lords. When the time is right and it is born, it will be able to rival the Tai golden bead. 3 primordial supreme treasures were born in the 3 eras of the true heaven and earth, but no such treasures were born in the anti-heaven and earth. This was because everything that had essence would turn into a demon master. Secondly, this place was as heavy as one. Other than indescribable items, nothing else could be kept. When the door of 2 realms was opened, the anti-heaven and earth was stirred, and many changes occurred. But the treasure was born so quickly because of the death of the 6 demon lords. It was born under the guidance of the original essence. Therefore, it could be said that the treasure was born because of the sacrifice of the 6 demon lords. Heng Jing was a little tempted, but he suddenly thought of something. He sighed and said, I wonder where Demon Lord Chizhou went. If I can make this demon lord join hands with me, and with this treasure, we will have nothing to fear even if we have to fight with the people of humanity. Chi Meng Demon Lord said, Just now when I woke up, I saw Demon Lord Chizhou seem to have comprehended something and escaped to an unknown place. He must have gone to look for opportunities. Heng Jing's spirit was lifted. He said, If that's the case, it's a good thing. But I don't know when Demon Lord Chizhou will come out. Chi Yao thought for a while and said in a deep voice, We can talk about this later. There is one thing that is very important. Before the door of heaven and earth closes, without Demon Lord Chizhou's protection, the collision of the 2 realms will be harmful to me. I need to find a way to restrain it. There was no obstruction between the main and anti-heaven. It was good and bad for them. The good was that there would be an endless supply of unknown things, and their strength would increase significantly. The bad was that the anti-heaven and earth would be too affected by the chi dynamic of the main heaven and earth. The unknown things might not be as pure as before. Ling raised his chin and said, This isn't just our problem. I believe the people of the human Tao are just as anxious. Once they come, I'll take the opportunity to meet them and see if they're as formidable as you say they are. Chapter 21:12. Ling Jun and the others initially thought that without the barrier between the two realms, the spiritual vigor would clash with each other, greatly affecting the myriad heavens and 10,000 realms. In that case, the people of Tao would definitely not be able to sit still. Not long after, they would come looking for them, either to question them or to seek a solution. By then, he could take the opportunity to see the cultivators of the people of Tao, to see if they were really as powerful as they had seen in the past. However, the result was far beyond their expectations. They waited for a long time, but there was no response from the people of Tao, as if they were ignoring the matter. Heng Jing asked in surprise, is the people of Tao not afraid of unknown things invading the realms and triggering a change in the spiritual vigor of the myriad heavens and 10,000 realms? At this moment, Ling Jun's expression did not look too good. At the same time, he felt a little incredulous. From what he had seen in the past, the people of Tao had always guarded their own realms and were also very guarded against them. There was no reason for them to ignore it. The other demon masters were also puzzled. If it was not for the fact that the myriad heavens and 10,000 realms were still relatively stable, they would have suspected that something had happened in the people of Tao. Qiao pondered for a while and said slowly, the people of Tao have not arrived yet. Perhaps they want to compete with us in patience. However, if the stalemate continues, it will not be beneficial for either party. However, the people of Tao have a strong foundation and can withstand wear and tear, but we can't. Therefore, I think we need to erect a barrier immediately to prevent too much damage. Heng Jing said, but this is a matter between the two realms. Why are we the only ones who stand up? Ji Su said plainly, if I don't want to solve the problem and take the initiative to look for the people of Tao, it would seem that we are unable to solve the problem. Then, we would have to lower our heads. Qiao looked at the place where Ling Jun was and said, what do you think, fellow Taoist? Ling Jun actually wanted to continue waiting to see who was more patient. However, just now, his judgment was wrong. It was not good for him to voice out his objection, so he could only reluctantly agree, let's do this for now. Ji Hua and Jian Tong did not say a word about this. It was not difficult for them to see that Ling Jun actually wanted to take this opportunity to fight with Qi Yao for the position of chief. They did not care who was the leader and who was the subordinate. They would follow whoever was more correct and could lead the people to benefit more. However, Ling Jiao had clearly suffered a setback in the first round of confrontation. Therefore, unknowingly, they had moved a little towards Qi Yao. With the barrier between the two worlds gone, the main and reverse heavens and earth collided with each other, and the spiritual vigor of the myriad realms changed. With such a huge commotion, Bai Wei and Deng Zhang naturally noticed it at the first moment. The two of them quickly discussed it and decided that the appearance of 3 more demon masters was extremely good news for them. Currently, human Tao was extremely powerful, and 3 demon masters had suddenly appeared in the soul world. It was impossible for human Tao to not pay attention to them. In this case, the pressure on their side would be lessened a little. Bai Wei pondered for a moment and said, if this junior has any thoughts, then he will definitely come looking for us. Deng Zhang said coldly, in reality, even if there are a few more people, it will only change the situation slightly. It's still not comparable to when our 3 families were at their peak. Fellow Taoist, there's no need to count on it too much. Right now, it's best to incite internal strife in human Tao. It's more appropriate to wait until the human Tao era is over before looking for an opportunity. Bai Wei also nodded in agreement. However, he sighed inwardly. If Taoist Daoi had put in effort earlier and did not think too much, perhaps human Tao would have been destroyed long ago. How could their families have fallen to such an embarrassing state today? At this moment, Zhang Yan had already sunk into a state of unawareness. However, this was only for this body of strength. His own consciousness was not restrained at all. Even though only a strand of consciousness had entered this time, it had still reached the level of spirit refinement. However, he did not show off because of this. Instead, he did his best to restrain himself. This was because his consciousness was too detached from his body. If he exerted too much force, it was very likely that he would encounter the same situation as before. He would be expelled from the Bush Tian Weili, and his own body might even collapse because it could not withstand it. He was very clear that he was currently in the gap between the two gates. Because he was advancing towards the next gate, and because he hadn't reached his goal yet, he existed in the real world between existence and non-existence. If he could charge through this barrier in one go, then he would be able to directly reach the 8th barrier of strength path. From then on, he would transcend and no longer exist in the world. However, if he did not succeed, then this body would be lost here, unable to leave again. Although it still belonged to the world, it was as if it did not exist. Previously, he thought that as long as he found the way, he would quickly come into contact with more Bush Tian Weili and use them to supplement himself. Now, the development of the situation was indeed as he expected. As he advanced towards the next barrier, there was a continuous stream of Yin Weili. At the same time, a mysterious and unfathomable technique gradually surged out of his mind. It was as if this technique was innately imprinted in his body. Just now, he was relying on these Yin Weili to gradually awaken it. As he steadily advanced, more and more of them appeared. However, the path here wasn't a smooth one. Just like when he tried to cross the spirit refinement realm, there were many obstacles here. If he made a mistake in his comprehension of the cultivation technique, then he might never be able to cross it again. Fortunately, he was now standing at a higher level, so he could look down from above, so this was nothing to him. And with every barrier, he would be able to obtain more Weili, and his body would become stronger. In his view, this was actually the process of pushing him to continuously absorb Yin Qi from the Weili. Once he found all the techniques and passed all the obstacles, it would be about time for him to succeed. From his current perspective, there were many flaws here. He did not know whether the owner of the demonic treasury had inadvertently overlooked it or left it there on purpose. There were some obstacles that he felt were unnecessary, so he simply bypassed them. Of course, only those who had a clear understanding of the cultivation method would be able to do so. If he didn't have Chi Path spirit refinement cultivation like him, he could only honestly follow this path. And as the Weili filled his body, he gradually obtained the techniques, and finally reached the end. Now, he only needed to take a step forward, and he would be able to enter the 8th realm of the enlightened Tao comprehending divine contract. However, when he arrived here, he stopped. He could feel that if he followed the cultivation technique that the owner of the demonic treasury had prepared, it might not be a suitable path for him. Moreover, he did not want to follow the path that others had arranged for him. Although the owner of the demonic treasury had supported him after he entered the 7th realm of strength, he did not know what the owner's true goal was, so he could not completely trust the owner. Thus, it was not feasible to follow the method. Previously, his realm was not high enough, so he had no choice. But now, it was different. After entering the spirit refinement realm, it was not difficult for him to understand the many principles here. He could completely try to break out of the original rut, and walk a different path from before. Not only could this path free him from the influence of the previous path, it would also be more suitable for him. However, he could also feel that the final step that he had not taken actually contained a lot of mysteries, and if he did not take this step, he would not be able to see it. But he did not care about this anymore. With the 7th realm of strength as the foundation, in addition to what he had seen before, it was already enough for him. Next, he could use the jade fragment to verify it. Thinking of this, his thoughts turned, and he retreated from it. It was also because he had entered the spirit refinement realm long ago that he could see through all the mysteries here, so he could easily do this. If he had followed the path of the owner of the demonic treasury without changing a single step, he could not have retreated before he reached the end. At this time, he spread out his spirit will, and completely concealed this memory. He prepared to wait until it merged with the main body, and then erase it as well, so as to avoid this trouble in the future. Just as he was about to deduce the method, he glanced over and found that the 3 demon master consciousnesses that were originally sleeping in the anti-world had actually awakened, and they had already entered the main world, meeting up with Qi Yao and the other 2. He glanced over, and did not care about this matter anymore. With the current strength of the human path, not to mention the 3 additional demon masters, even if the demon master consciousnesses that had been worn away by the robbery power awaken at once, this generation would still not be a match for them. On the other hand, with the great increase in strength of the soul world, coupled with the fact that the newly awakened demon masters had not experienced a great battle with the cultivators of the human path, it was very likely that they would cause some trouble. If it was in the past, in order to prevent them from growing stronger, he would definitely suppress them, but now that he had reached this realm, he naturally would not pay attention to such a small matter. As far as he was concerned, even more cultivators of the devil Tao would be born after this generation appeared, and the cultivators of the human Tao would have an opponent to temper themselves against. Moreover, these people would be able to stir up karma for him and draw the dark stones into the world. So, this was actually a good thing. However, when he thought up to here, his heart suddenly moved, and he seemed to have sensed something. He turned his head to look at a certain place, and saw that within the anti-world, there was a treasured embryo that was churning and brewing, and it seemed to be rapidly forming. He immediately recognized that this treasure was contained within the essence of the anti-world, and once it was born, just from the surface, it might not be much inferior to the Tai gold pearl. But in reality, this treasure could only compete with the golden pearl before it had been controlled by anyone, and this was because its foundation was slightly lacking. A primordial supreme treasure like the Tai gold pearl was born from the Bushu heaven's fortune Weili. However, this treasured embryo had not been directly irrigated by the Yin Weili, and was only nourished by the fluctuations of its chi activity. The difference between the two was very obvious, and even if it was truly formed in the end, without the spirit refinement Weili, it would be impossible to bring it out of the world, and it could be said to be a treasure of the mortal world. However, it was not that there was no way to remedy this. He pondered for a moment, if he could draw a portion of the Bushu heaven's Yin Weili over, and use it to build the treasured embryo, then the result would be very different, and it might really become a supreme treasure similar to the Tai gold pearl. It was just that he could not mobilize too much of the Yin Weili at the moment, and he would probably only care about this place after he reached the 8th gate of the path of strength. Thus, he withdrew his thoughts and concealed his own aura. Then, he sat down and sank his consciousness into the broken jade. Chapter 21:13. As Zhang Yan deduced, he saw many paths ahead. Every result seemed the same, but there were slight differences between them. He did not waste too much time here. Right now, he just needed to find the most suitable method for himself, and there was no need to choose the one that seemed the most perfect. The reason for this was because he had not reached the end of this path, and cultivation itself was a method to make up for what he lacked. Just like how he was constantly unraveling the unknown, the perfection he felt right now was just what he thought. Before he truly understood the great path, there would definitely be flaws, and he could slowly make them up in the future. Just now, he was searching for the upper realm. Although he had not taken the final step, after deducing, it was not difficult to see that no matter what method he used, when he walked over, he would have to abandon everything in the past and use the Butian Yin Weili as the foundation to rebuild his body. It was just that this body of strength had many imprints left behind when he cultivated the divine contract. Because of this, just now, as he walked forward, the key points of the method would continuously appear in his mind. However, these would all disappear at the final transformation. No matter what the owner of the demonic treasury wanted, it was impossible for him to let him go so easily. Thus, he deduced that if he followed the original method, when he took the final step, the owner of the demonic treasury would definitely use the same trick again and carve a method or something else into his body. Once he succeeded, unless he destroyed this body, he would never be able to get rid of it. In reality, if he purely used the method of strength to advance, he would not be able to resist at all. Fortunately, he was a dual cultivator of chi and strength, and he had reached spirit refinement first on the path of chi, so there were many things here that were not difficult for him to deal with. Now, without relying on the divine contract, he could also succeed with the method he deduced. This way, he could completely throw away the remnants of the past. The only variable here was whether the owner of the demonic treasury would react to this. But just like those great virtues, if they could appear themselves, why would they set up these arrangements? As such, there was no need to worry about this. However, from the arrangements left behind by the ancestors, they would not only leave something in Butian, but they would also leave something in other realms. If he failed here, perhaps there would be people from other realms to replace him. There was no need to think too much about this. After passing this stage, he would be free of all his previous restraints. No matter what tricks the owner of the demonic treasury had, he would not be able to be implicated. After making up his mind, he circulated the method he deduced and his body of strength once again disappeared. He had only appeared for an instant, so no one had seen him. Because he had created the method himself, his progress was extremely smooth. Soon, he arrived at the final step of the door, but he encountered some resistance. Although the method was different, in the end, he still needed to use the great power of the inside. Only the entrance left by the owner of the demonic treasury could lead to the location of the great power. As long as it wasn't used according to the technique, the door wouldn't open, and it wouldn't be able to draw in enough energy at one go. He had already seen this in his deductions, so he was already prepared. Although the owner of the demonic treasury was powerful, he was not the master of Butian, so he could not use the Wali of Butian to defend. At most, he could only borrow some, so the resistance here was not as strong as he had imagined. Now that there was a gap here, even if he did not break it, he could still absorb the Wali he needed. However, he still needed the body of strength here. If he used the Wali of Qi, he would instead encounter strong resistance. He stopped before the door and absorbed strand after strand of the Wali, gradually strengthening himself. At the same time, he dissolved his old body bit by bit. There was no length of time here, no past or future. Everything that happened was inexplicable. As his body was rebuilt, there was finally a moment when he felt that the door seemed to have disappeared and could no longer obstruct him, so he sucked. Boom! The barrier between the real world and the void was broken. Everything in front of him became illusory, like a painting that could disappear at any moment. He understood that at this moment, he had formed his body of strength and officially stepped into the 8th gate of strength path. The sky collapses, the earth shatters, the god does not move. He stood with his hands behind his back and raised his head. The human world is not my world, I will ask the whole world. As soon as he said this, his mind expanded, and in an instant, he went to a higher place. He looked at the scene he saw when he achieved the spirit refinement realm, where countless worlds appeared and disappeared like stars. He felt it carefully. The mana of the spirit cultivators were fighting against each other. However, this body of strength didn't have any mana ripples that spread outwards. Instead, it was condensed into one, eternal. Only when the spirit cultivator cultivated to the 2nd realm could he hide his chi. The body of strength didn't need to do this, it was like this the moment he entered this realm. However, in order to understand more of the great Tao, perhaps he could only obtain it by fighting with his opponent. Moreover, this was a one-sided battle. In other words, once he fought with his opponent, he would be able to see many truths from his opponent, even things that his opponent had not hidden, but his opponent would not be able to obtain anything from him. Therefore, if he wanted to rely on this body to look into the upper realm, he would have to fight with his peers. Fortunately, he was also a spirit cultivator and didn't need to do that. However, it could be seen that although the two paths had different beginnings, they would end up in the same place. After feeling for a long time, he combined the body of strength path and the body of chi path into one. At this moment, he felt like he was reborn. Usually, cultivators in the path of chi would abandon their external bodies early in the process of cultivation, but this was not the case for him. He had always been using chi and strength together, so the two had always been one. However, his strength path body had always been left outside, which meant that he had always been missing a part of himself. Now, he had finally become complete. When the two spirits were connected, the first thing he did was to erase the memory that he hid before. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't know about this experience, but that he had changed from a person who experienced it to a bystander. At this moment, he raised his sleeves, put 2 fingers together, and lightly swiped at the void. In an instant, a hole seemed to be torn in the silence, and it faded away just now. He didn't know what was behind the hole, but it wasn't hard to understand that if someone was forced into this place, it was no different from sending them to eternal silence. When the two bodies of strength were combined, it meant that the yin and yang Weili of Busu's heavenly body were combined. It was naturally more powerful than the original single strength. However, this didn't mean that he could fight against the great virtue. At most, he could close the distance. It should be known that the difference in realm could often overwhelm all changes. However, with this ability, he might be able to try entering a place of fortune guarded by a master. At this moment, he turned his gaze and saw that the treasure embryo was immersed in the treasure that was being born. At this moment, it was about to take shape. However, at this moment, because he had brought out a lot of yin Weili and poured them into the treasure embryo, the surging chi activity from before couldn't resist at all and was quickly repelled. After taking in an unknown amount of yin Weili, the treasure embryo seemed to have shed a layer of old clothes, and a spiritual light was born from it. It was about to be born. At the same time, a spiritual nature was gradually born from it. If left alone, then it would give birth to a consciousness similar to Taoist Daoi. Zhang Yan wanted to take this treasure, so he naturally wouldn't leave too much trouble for himself. He casually wiped it away, and then waited for a moment for the spiritual light to fade. He waved his hand and took it. He saw that it was a dark crystal jade. It was round and square at the same time. With a little bit of magic power, a large amount of yin Weili surged out. He took a look inside and understood the mystery of this item. However, if he wanted to unleash its true power, he still needed to refine it a little. At this moment, he glanced to the side and saw that the waves of yin qi that had been pushed out did not dissipate. Instead, it transformed into another treasured embryo, and there was even a trace of yin qi wrapped within it. This treasure was destined to appear in the anti-heaven and earth. After the crystal jade fell into his hands, it naturally transcended. Therefore, the remaining yin qi continued to condense into a treasure according to the will of heaven. This time, he didn't touch it again and let it fall here. With a wave of his sleeve, he returned to Qinghuan Palace. Outside the Kunshe continent, Dan Yi, Michihito Ichido, Fu Qingming, Daoist Wan Kei, and the others were sitting in a circle, watching Qi Yao and the other demon masters rebuild the barrier between the two worlds. Dan Yi said, as Daoist Wan Kei said, these people will repair the barrier when they see that we aren't here. Just now, when he noticed that another demon master had entered the world, he planned to leave immediately and go there to discuss with the six of them how to repair the barrier. However, Daoist Wan Kei didn't agree with this. He thought that these demon masters were actively waiting for them to come. If they were too impatient, they would be easily taken advantage of, so it was better to wait. In terms of losses, there was no doubt that the other side would suffer more. These people would definitely be the first to lose control, so there was no need for them to interfere too much. Now that the result was out, it was as he expected. Michihito Ichido said, I have said long ago that there is no need to pay too much attention to these people. So what if there are a few more demon masters? If they stay obediently, let them go. If they jump out, then it won't be too late to deal with them. Human Dao had the confidence to say this now. The heartless Taoists, Khanate demons, and even these extraterrestrial demons didn't have a single Dao treasure. Even if there were 3 more demon masters, they wouldn't have the ability to fundamentally change the difference in strength. Fu Qingming looked at this time and said, although this person has built a barrier, it doesn't look strong. The barrier between the two worlds wasn't so easy to build. Although they could visualize the materials needed, it might not last long under the impact of the power of the two worlds. From time to time, it would need to be repaired. Unless there was a demon master who was willing to guard this place for a long time like Zhang Yan's original body of strength. Even though they could obtain benefits by doing so, no one would be willing to sit here and not move. Therefore, the side of the human Dao predicted that in order to find better treasures, they would definitely come looking for them. At the same time, they would also come to test their attitude. Michihito Ichido laughed coldly and said, then let's wait for this person to come find us. Chapter 21:14. Zhang Yan returned to Qinghuan Palace and sat cross-legged on the jade platform at the head of the hall. Because he had changed his strength path cultivation method, from this moment on, it was no longer the original, enlightened path comprehending divine contract. Perhaps it was time to change its name. As he thought of this, he realized that there were very few people who could reach the level of mortal transformation. Even if there were, it was due to their innate talent. Most of them were of different species, and there were almost no cultivators who could reach the level of mortal transformation. As for the level of true yang, from what he had sensed in the present world, no one had achieved it except for him. This path was very difficult. This was because strength path used more external medicine than chi path, but it was also because the cultivation method was naturally deficient, and there was no real path to progress. It was almost impossible for a cultivator to open up a path on their own. Among the billions of people in the present world, there was no lack of talented people who tried to do so, but most of them failed halfway, and the rest gave up. There were almost no exceptions. Therefore, this path could only be pushed from top to bottom. Now that he had reached the highest realm, he had actually walked this path. He suddenly thought that the strength path body did not have mana ripples outside, and it might be because he was the only strength path cultivator in the void. If there were many people of the same path here, then perhaps it would be a different scene. It was still difficult for him to know whether this was true, but he could try to verify it. With a thought, he punched toward the void. In an instant, a powerful and vast mana ripple was blasted into the billions of times in the present world, and at the same time, the strength path was transmitted out. What was transmitted here was not the method itself, but the profound truth of the great path, so that the living beings in the present world could step on this path, and it would no longer be a dead end. As for the specific cultivation method, the living beings in the world could use various methods to derive and evolve it over the long years, and there was no need for him to specifically intervene. He was very much looking forward to someone succeeding in the future and calling him fellow Taoist. He looked back at Bushutian, who also had the inheritance of the great path, but for his own sect, there was no need to waste time and effort to derive it, and he could directly teach it to these younger disciples. However, his own method was not suitable for others, so after thinking for a moment, he derived another method. After thinking for a moment, he pointed with his finger, and a golden book appeared in front of him with 4 words on it. He waved his sleeve again, and the lights scattered as they flew toward their disciples. He thought for a while more, then created 2 completely different strength path techniques, and sent them to the Golden Pavilion and the Duzhen Palace respectively. After doing this, he looked outside and saw the Jizhuang Doran's mana ripple continue to expand. He was clearly still searching for the essence of creation in order to find that existence's avatar. After reaching the 8th stage of strength path, although there was no way to solve this problem immediately, there was no doubt that he had many more methods to deal with it. If Jizhuang really did receive that existence's avatar into the world, then he would try to attack the Mirror Lake. In the past, this was impossible, but with the combination of qi and power, it was possible. At that time, he would attack from the outside, and if Ancestor Yao Han and the others rebelled, then there would be a chance to overturn Jizhuang Daoren. Although he did not want to see Ancestor Yao Han take the stage, it was clear that the existence would bring more danger. However, unless there was no other way, he did not want to take this step. At this time, he used his mana to search for the essence of creation. With the magic treasure left by the great underworld ancestor, his chances of finding it were higher than the other. Not long after, 2 more chaotic heavens would descend. If there was a land of fortune or a fragment of the essence of fortune, as long as it was not obtained by outsiders, the possibility of Jizhuang finding such a place would decrease imperceptibly. In the Mirror Lake, Taoist Jizhuang suddenly felt uneasy. With such a feeling, it was clear that something bad had happened to him. However, he was curled up here, so the outside threat was almost negligible. Could it be that the omen came from the people in the inner realm? He thought a bit and shook his head. He knew that the people in the inner realm all had their own thoughts. Which soul refinement cultivator would be willing to submit to someone else and be manipulated by someone else? If it was him, he wouldn't be willing either. That was why these people would want to replace him, but that was different from whether or not he could do it. As long as he didn't make any mistakes, no one could threaten his position as master. It wasn't that he hadn't considered the possibility of the mirror lake being attacked from both inside and outside. However, although he had put a lot of pressure on his peers, he hadn't broken through the bottom line, so the possibility of that happening was very small. However, this might not necessarily involve his own safety. Perhaps it would hinder his search for that divine avatar. After thinking about it for a long time, he became even more certain that Bushutian had found a way to stop him. He had to find a way to resolve this matter. He couldn't help but ponder. Right now, it was not enough for him to search by himself. He needed someone to search with him. Although Bushutian could do the same, he couldn't find all the fragments of the essence of creation or the land of creation. He just needed to make sure that they had a higher chance of finding it. Even if they only found one fragment, he could use the aura he obtained to try to lure that divine avatar over. However, if everyone worked together, it wouldn't be good for his control. After thinking for a long time, he asked someone to invite Xian Che and Sang Xiao over. After the two arrived, he greeted them and invited them to take a seat. Then, he explained the reason. Today, I invited the two of you here to ask you to help me search for the essence of creation. It wasn't difficult for Xian Che and Sang Xiao to guess this person's purpose. They were people who understood the current situation. Since it was a request from their master, they agreed on the spot. Soon, the magic power of the three spread out in the silence. Zhang Yan was not surprised when he sensed the change. He had already guessed that the other party would react in this way. However, the fact that the other party had only invited two people to help was enough to show that the other party did not trust the people under his wing. He waved his sleeve and sent out several talisman inscriptions. He asked Bushutian and the other spirit refinement cultivators to release their magic power to search for the essence of creation. This forced Jizhuang Daoren to use everyone. When everyone was involved, the chances of finding the target increased. However, at the same time, there were more variables. If someone found the land of creation, it was very likely that that person wouldn't tell others and would find a way to take it for himself. Of course, he also faced the same problem. However, Bushutian didn't restrict anyone from coming and going. Even if someone went out and occupied a land of creation, he wouldn't be able to defend it by himself. In the end, he would most likely join forces with Bushutian. Before the two worlds closed, Qi Yao and the other 5 demon masters joined forces and finally built a barrier. Qi Yao said, "This barrier can only temporarily stop the collision between the two worlds. It's hard to say how long it can last. If I don't want to be trapped here, I need to ask for help from the human Dao. They'll allow me to harvest treasures from the Kunshe continent." Ling Chou looked into the reverse world and said, "Wait a little longer. We'll go after this treasure is born. That way, we'll have the confidence to negotiate with the human Dao." Everyone looked over and felt that this treasure was a little more powerful than just now. Moreover, its aura was overflowing. It was obvious that it wasn't far from entering the world. However, there was a problem in front of them now. When this treasure was formed, who would control it? After a moment of silence, Heng Jing was the first to speak. Demon Master Qi Yao has always been the person with the most profound cultivation among us. He's also fought against the human Dao for a long time. This treasure should be controlled by him. Ling Zhuan glanced to the side. When he saw that Ji Yu and Jian Tong were both silent, he said, "Although Demon Lord Qi Yao has fought against the people of humanity time and time again, I'm afraid that the final outcome might not be good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been forced into the soul world." Heng Jing argued, "Fellow Daoist, you can take a look at what happened to the heartless Daoists and the Khanate demons. It's not luck that we're still safe here. It's all thanks to fellow Daoist Qi Yao's strategy." However, Ling Chou revealed a mocking expression and said, "That's not necessarily the case. The reason why the people of Dao let you go is indeed because fellow Daoist Qi Yao retreated in time. However, in my opinion, Demon Lord Qi Zhou is also involved." He looked at Qi Yao and the other two. If it wasn't for the human Tao's fear of Demon Master Qi Zhou, he might not have been so easy to talk to. Heng Jing was speechless. In fact, he thought so too. Ling Qiu looked around at the crowd and continued, if Demon Master Qi Zhou is willing to come out and wield this treasure, there's no one more suitable than him. Unfortunately, this Demon Master is nowhere to be found. This treasure can't be left unattended. Only the 6 of us can wield it. Since Demon Master Qi Yao didn't gain the upper hand previously, why don't you give me a chance? Qi Yao had been silent all this while. However, when he heard this, he decided to fight for it. It wasn't that he was unwilling to part with the treasure, but the person who wielded it would undoubtedly be the person in charge. Ling Qiu was too radical and had never fought against the human Tao. The matter couldn't be handed over to him, otherwise, everyone might be dragged into it. He said, Demon Master Qi Zhou's absence is a deterrent to the human Tao. Instead of growing stronger, we're actually weaker. I'd like to ask, how do you plan to fight against the human Tao? Ling Jun seemed to have a well-thought-out plan as he said, fellow Daoist Bai Wei and fellow Daoist Deng Zhang have always been fighting against the human Tao. I'm sure they know more about this matter than we do. I think there's no harm in seeking out the 2 of them and listening to their suggestions before making a decision. He knew that if he acted rashly, none of his fellow Taoists would trust him. Furthermore, he had no chance of winning. However, things would be different if he sought out Bai Wei and Deng Zhang. In terms of fighting against the human Tao, these 2 undoubtedly had more experience. In comparison, Qi Yao's original advantage was nothing. Just as they were discussing, there was a surge in the anti-heaven and earth. An indescribable object was swallowed by the precious fetus that was being nurtured. Then, with a flash of dim light, a treasure shed its hard shell and jumped out. Chapter 21:15. Seeing that the treasure had already been born, Ling Qiu hurriedly used his transcendence energy to grab it. He wanted to take it first so that he could avoid any verbal arguments. However, when he used his transcendence energy, the treasure flashed and easily avoided him. Then, it plunged downwards, looking like it was about to escape into the depths of the anti-heaven and earth. The demon masters present could tell that the treasure had developed a consciousness and was unwilling to be controlled by them. This thing was born from the anti-heaven and earth. If it escaped, unless it was willing to show itself, it would be very difficult to find it again. Qi Yao used his divine will and said, everyone, try to take it. Now, whoever controlled this treasure would have the greatest right to speak. However, he believed that even if someone else obtained it, it would be better than Ling Qiu. When he spoke, Jian Tong and Ji Kun were still hesitating, but Heng Jing and Lan Su did not hesitate and immediately tried to capture it. Ling Qiu sneered and forcefully pushed away their transcendence energy. He grabbed the treasure again and succeeded this time. However, at this moment, Qi Yao's transcendence energy also arrived. When the 2 of them used their power, something unexpected happened. The treasure actually split into 2. One half remained in Ling Qiu's hand, while the other was in Qi Yao's hand. Although Qi Yao was surprised, once the item was in his hands, he used a little of his magic power to extinguish the consciousness that was separated from the room. Ling Qiu looked at the treasure and found that it was a jade tablet. Coincidentally, he was holding one half of it. He said, Demon Master Qi Yao, splitting this treasure in 2 is not beneficial to us. Qi Yao put away the jade tablet in his hand and said calmly, I think this is suitable. Ling Qiu looked at him and knew that he could not take it back. He said, that's fine. It's better in Demon Master Qi Yao's hands than in the hands of outsiders. He also wiped away the consciousness of the half-treasure in his hand and put it away. He said, since this treasure has been completed, we can go to the human Tao to ask for the precious materials. What do you think, fellow Taoist? Qi Yao thought for a moment and nodded. Now is the time. Since the 2 of them agreed, the others did not object. After reaching an agreement, the 6 of them left and headed for Busu Tian. Inside the Yaoyin clan's Gushao mountainside hall, Wei Zihong was thinking about how to pass on his skills after reading the Strength Path secret manual. To be honest, This skill was most useful to him because there were many disciples in the Yaoyin clan, and most of them did not have high aptitudes. In the Yaoyin clan, even if the disciples of the clan did not have high achievements in cultivation, they could still take care of the secular affairs. If you worked hard, then after you died, the clan would bring you back. Even if you could not do it in this life, you could still do it in the next life. The reason why the Yaoyin clan was so prosperous now was because of this rule. As long as the entire clan still existed, there was a possibility for them to achieve Tao. But even if it couldn't be done on the Qi path, that didn't mean it couldn't be done on the strength path. As a mortal body cultivator, Wei Zihong knew very well that there had never been a cultivator who could reach his level in the strength path. Although there were some demons that could fight against mortal metamorphosis cultivators, they did not rely on their own cultivation. They all relied on their innate power. This was also the peak that this generation could reach. It was impossible to go any further. Even if they were given Yuan Jades, they would not know how to use them. However, this method could allow a weak body to cultivate all the way to the level of splitting the heavens and splitting the earth. He couldn't help but sigh. Other than the unfathomable Dharma path, although the Qi and strength paths were often mentioned in the same breath, in reality, the first half of the strength path cultivation could still compete with the Qi path. At the later half, it was firmly suppressed by the Qi path, and there was no possibility of competing. But now, with this method, the situation of the two Dharma paths existing side by side might really be realized. He glanced at the secret book in his hand. Just now, the Divine Will had communicated with him, and he knew that the other members of the clan had also received the same thing. Although his teacher only gave them this item, and did not specifically say how to do it, among them, no one could cultivate the strength path. Therefore, the meaning behind this was clearly for them to widely spread this method among the younger generation. He was very proactive about this, and immediately ordered people to find 2 elders of the clan, and asked which disciples had a firm heart to pursue Tao, but were hindered by their aptitude and did not make any progress. Those outstanding disciples were not in the list of choices. This opportunity was mainly given to those disciples who originally had no talent in the Qi path. If they could have some achievements in the strength path, it would also be the clan's fortune. The 2 elders discussed for a while, then handed over the name list, and said that there might be omissions in it, and that it would be added later. Wei Zihong took a quick look, and showed the first half of the golden book to the 2 elders. He then said, if these disciples are willing, they can switch to this method in the future. After reading the first half of the method, one of the elders was greatly astonished, and said, this strength path method, if there is enough external medicine, can push a suitable disciple into the 3rd rank in about 20 to 30 years, which is equivalent to a core formation cultivator. If this method is spread, it can greatly increase the abilities of the clan's younger generation disciples. The other elder also nodded. In the past, the strength path method was very rough, and was not as particular as the Qi path method, where each major realm was divided into another small realm. However, this method had a path that was similar to the Qi path, where each rank was divided into 3 layers, and one could cultivate step by step, and there would not be too much deviation. He asked tentatively, may I know where the method of sect master came from? Wei Zihong said, this was taught by my master. So it's a method taught by Yuan Zun, no wonder. The 2 elders showed expressions of reverence. At this time, the elder who first spoke hesitated, and asked tentatively, Sect Master, if those disciples of the different race in the clan ask about it, Wei Zihong said straightforwardly, this method is currently only suitable for disciples of the human race, the disciples of the different race are temporarily not in the consideration. Under normal circumstances, he would treat all disciples of the different race equally, but first of all, this generation did not pose a threat to the human race, but when it came to a method that could change the balance of power between the 2 sides, he would definitely not let it go. Especially when his master was the palace master of the Duzhen Hall of Qinsang School, and Qinsang School never accepted disciples of the different race, so he could only exclude them. Inside the golden pavilion of the floating heavenly palace, Shen Baishuang carefully read through the scroll of the strength path method in his hands, and after reading it, he was also very emotional. This secret record not only contained the method itself, but there were also many annotations, clearly explaining the principles of cultivation. For a cultivator of his level, even if he did not cultivate the strength path, he would still be able to benefit a lot from it. It even mentioned that if a strength path cultivator obtained the primordial jade, he could also use it to reach the true yang level, and if he went further, he could faintly see a higher path. He knew how attractive this was to cultivators. Some of the more talented cultivators might even give up their previous cultivation path and switch to this Tao when they saw this cultivation method. After careful consideration, he separated the annotations from the method, and then came to the secret pavilion that only the pavilion master and the sect master could enter. There was a shrine here, divided into a total of 3 layers. The top layer placed the fundamental method of the Qinsang school, the 5 gong and 3 scriptures, and they were all written by the Tai Ming patriarch. The second layer, on the other hand, contained the cultivation methods, secret techniques, and their own insights left by the previous sect masters, the Duzhen Hall, and the Tian Kong Hall master. Further down, there were the more superior Dao techniques deduced by the previous elders of the sect. He solemnly placed this strength path method on the second layer, and it was placed at the very front. As for the annotations, he placed it in another secret shrine by itself, and locked it with layers of restrictions. Then, he wrote a line of words on the side. The annotations here are not for those who have just entered the grotto heaven. Jizhuang Daoren saw several waves of Fa Li coming out from Bushutian, and his expression changed slightly. Obviously, everyone here had acted together to compete with him for the creation essence. He had also thought of encouraging everyone to act, but he did not dare to do so. It was fine to monitor 2 people, but even if someone found a place of fortune, they would have to be there before they could occupy it. As the master, he could suppress them as long as he discovered a clue. However, if he allowed everyone in the Mirror Lake to act like this, he would not be able to take care of it at all. So, he simply endured. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, he could achieve this, even if it took a long time. Zhang Yan saw that after he made his counterattack, there was no new response from the Mirror Lake, and the situation was still the same. This was undoubtedly because Ji Zhuang did not want to summon more people. However, in a sense, this method could be considered to be very correct. Since I can't suppress you, then I might as well not fight with you. In any case, the final result may not be much different. At most, it would only prolong the time of the battle. This was nothing to a spirit refinement cultivator. He thought about it for a while. What came next would depend on fate. He only needed to think about how to deal with it when it came to that step. As he thought about it, he felt something. He looked up and saw a talisman floating outside Bushutian. He took it and looked at it. It was sent by ancestor Yao Han. It said that if Zhang Yan wanted to stop Jizhuang Daoren, he had to act now. It said that as long as Zhang Yan led the people to attack the Mirror Lake, he would find a way to give Jizhuang Daoren enough pressure. Then, he would be able to incite the people in the Mirror Lake to work together and overthrow him. He thought about it and felt that ancestor Yao Han's words could not be trusted. That person just wanted to use this opportunity to make him take the lead, and then reap the benefits. If the situation was not right, he would be the first to retreat. The key was that he did not have the confidence to take down the Mirror Lake. Otherwise, he would not have minded doing this. He only needed to stop ancestor Yao Han from taking the master's position. At this moment, he glanced at a certain direction. Not long after, another chaos sky would descend. This was the chaos sky that the Jade Heaven sect ascended to. He wondered if he could find any clues about the Yao Han ancestor here. If he could determine his true intentions, it would be convenient for him to descend and execute his plan.